Hi guys. Tonight we step into the courtyard of a medieval castle, where the night air alone feels like a trial designed to test your very limits. The stones under your boots crunch with a dusting of snow, and the wind knifes through the open gatehouse, dragging with it the scent of smoke from some distant hearth you will never reach. You've barely arrived, and already you feel the sharp bite of winter gnawing at your fingertips, stiffening your breath into visible clouds. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you want, post your location and local time down in the comments. I always love to see where in the world you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. The reality is simple. You probably won't survive this night. A castle courtyard in the depths of winter is no romantic postcard. It is an arena of endurance. You trudge across the cobblestones, their uneven surfaces slick with frost. Your shoes, if you can even call them that, are little more than leather sacks tied with cord. They soak through quickly, leaving your toes stiff, numb, and whispering threats of frostbite. Some visitors might imagine that castles, with their thick walls and proud towers, offered safety and comfort. Yet you immediately realize they are built for defense, not for warmth. The courtyard funnels the icy wind like a great stone trumpet, amplifying its howl until your ears ring. Historians still argue whether such architecture intentionally channeled air to deter fires or whether it was simply the unplanned cruelty of necessity. Whatever the truth, tonight it feels like the walls themselves are conspiring to strip you of heat. A dog pads across the frozen ground, its breath steaming in the air, curling up like incense from a censer. You envy its thick fur, though the poor beast shivers as it noses at scraps frozen into the dirt. Somewhere above, a banner flaps violently in the gale, the fabric stiff like parchment, its colors dulled by frost. That sound, whip, 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 is constant, relentless, like a drum reminding you of your fragile mortality. You glance around, hoping to find shelter, but there is none here. The wooden scaffolds near the wall are rimed with ice, ladders slick and treacherous. Even the well in the center of the courtyard is capped with a disk of frozen water, glittering faintly in torchlight. Your lips stick together as you swallow, and you realize how precious a sip of unfrozen water would be. The truth is, people here chewed snow and ice when necessary, though it robbed them of more warmth than it provided. The soldiers stationed nearby stamp their boots, trying to coax circulation back into numb feet. One curses under his breath, though not loudly enough to risk the attention of his superior. His breath curls into a white halo, then vanishes instantly. These men, hardened and trained for war, suffer just as you do. A quirky tidbit survives in medieval records. Some garrisons stuffed straw into their boots, not for padding but as insulation, though dampness often made it worse. A torch sizzles as snowflakes strike its flame, each hiss echoing in your ears. The shadows it throws stretch long and distorted across the wall, giants of smoke and stone looming over you. For a moment, you wonder if the darkness itself holds more threat than the cold, until the next gust of wind steals even that thought away. The night deepens. Your skin prickles. Your chest tightens as icy air scours your throat raw. You long for the great hall. Imagined warmth, imagined feasting, imagined relief. But you are not there yet. Right now you are stranded in this courtyard, exposed and utterly unprepared, with nothing but stone walls to reflect the cold back at you. And so, with your teeth beginning to chatter in rhythm with the snapping banner above, you take your first hesitant steps toward the heavy oak doors. They promise shelter, yes, but also the revelation that inside the castle, things may be far less forgiving than you ever dared to picture. The heavy oak doors grind open on their iron hinges, and you step inside, expecting some blessed reprieve from the wind. Instead, the chill simply changes its form. It no longer roars in your ears like a gale. Now it clings to your skin like a damp second garment, seeping from the very stones that surround you. You realize with a dull sinking of the heart that this castle breathes cold, as if the walls themselves have been waiting centuries just to trap and share it. The floor beneath your boots is flagstone, slick with condensation. Moisture beads along the mortar lines, glistening in the dim torchlight. You reach out to steady yourself against the wall, only to jerk your hand back stone colder than ice, biting straight through your skin. Historians still argue whether medieval builders knew how poorly these thick walls held heat, or if they simply didn't care. Either way, your bones already ache from the damp that radiates upward. You catch a whiff of musty mildew mixed with the faint tang of smoke. Somewhere, far down a corridor, a hearth must be smouldering, though the warmth never travels this far. The air is heavy with moisture, and when you breathe, your lungs protest. That rattling sensation in your chest, it is the castle's welcome gift to you. Your footsteps echo hollowly, amplifying the sense of emptiness. Even your own breath seems louder here. You notice a tapestry drooping on one wall, its once bright threads dulled, edges stiff with frost. It is meant to provide insulation, yet the draught sneaks behind it and rattles it like a curtain. A quirky little fact: nobles often lined their chambers with multiple layers of fabric, not only for decoration but also as makeshift insulation. The trouble was, cloth absorbs damp, and soon you are left with a wall of clammy blankets whispering against stone. You walk deeper, and the corridor narrows. Above, the ceiling vaults in shadow, the ribs of Gothic arches catching faint glimmers of firelight. Every sound, every creak, every cough travels upward, vanishing into the cold silence. You become aware of how your fingers tingle, how your toes are growing numb. It feels as though the castle is leeching away not only your warmth but your very strength. A servant hurries past, clutching a bundle of kindling. Her cheeks are flushed from exertion, but her breath hangs in the air just as yours does. She keeps her eyes lowered. No words are exchanged. The impression is clear. She, too, is fighting the endless winter that resides within these walls. You realize that warmth here is rationed, hoarded, and never guaranteed. And then you pause by a narrow arrow slit. Outside, you glimpse the night again. Snow swirls in the torchlight, piling against the ledges. The opening is small, designed for defense, but it functions as a perfect conduit for drafts. The cold slithers through like a serpent, winding down the wall, brushing against your neck. You tug your cloak tighter, but the wind laughs at cloth. Historians still debate whether castles could have been built with better insulation or whether defense always trumped comfort. Some suggest straw-filled mats were hung over openings. Others insist drafts were simply tolerated, accepted as part of life. Standing here, you find little comfort in either explanation. Somewhere deeper inside, you hear the faint toll of a bell, perhaps a call to prayer, perhaps a signal to change the guard. The sound is distant, muffled by thick walls, yet the vibration seems to travel through the very floor beneath your boots. You realize you are standing inside a living machine, a structure that devours warmth and replaces it with discipline, duty, and chill. You rub your hands together, blowing into your palms, but the moisture freezes faster than it warms. Your knuckles ache, your ears burn, then dull. You can almost imagine frost tracing patterns along your skin. You trudge forward, because stopping means surrender. Each step feels heavier, slower, as though the cold air itself thickens around you. And then the corridor widens, the air faintly stirring with movement, and you sense that you are about to enter a space even grander, and yet perhaps no warmer than what you have endured so far. You pass under a carved archway and find yourself in the so-called Great Hall, a chamber that by name alone should feel majestic, warm, and reassuring. Instead, it greets you with a draught so insistent that the heavy banners along the walls flutter like sails caught in a storm. The long tables, laid out in rigid rows, stretch toward a distant hearth, yet the fire sputtering within it is nothing more than a stubborn orange eye fighting against the ocean of cold. The air carries the mingled scents of damp wood smoke, boiled cabbage, and wet wool. It's the unmistakable perfume of medieval life in winter, dense, clinging, impossible to escape. A line of torches throws light onto the stone columns, but the illumination doesn't reach every corner. Darkness seems to pool in the high beams of the roof, and in that darkness, you almost hear the scuttle of bats or the drip of condensation falling to the floor. You move closer to the fire, hopeful, though the relief it offers is meager at best. The blaze consumes logs greedily, yet the hall is so vast that heat disperses almost as soon as it's born. It's well documented in medieval sources that such halls were never truly warm except within a narrow ring around the hearth. Even nobles in their fine clothes would shuffle their stools closer, hoping their embroidered sleeves might catch some of the warmth. At one of the tables, a servant places trenchers, thick slabs of bread used as plates for an evening meal. The bread is coarse, heavy with grain, its edges beginning to stiffen in the chill air before anyone even takes a bite. Oddly enough, some accounts mention that trenchers were sometimes eaten after the meal, soaked with juices and grease, though many were tossed to dogs or beggars waiting by the door. Tonight, you imagine the bread crumbling like frozen clay in your hands. The hall resounds with sound, but not with cheer. A handful of voices murmur, yet every word echoes, as if the walls were mocking conversation. A dog barks once, startling a flock of pigeons that had found their way through gaps in the roof beams. Their wings clatter noisily before they vanish again into shadow. That's another reminder. Even the noblest chamber of the castle cannot keep out the cold, the damp, or the animals searching for scraps of life. You notice the clothing of those around you, even the lord seated at the high table, beneath a canopy of woven cloth, draws his fur-lined cloak tighter. His jeweled rings glitter in the torchlight, but his knuckles are reddened and swollen with cold. His courtiers tuck their hands into their sleeves, hiding the tremor of chilled fingers. It's not simply you, every soul in this chamber feels the relentless pressure of winter pressing down. At the far end of the hall, musicians attempt to play. Their lute strings twang unevenly, and a small harp sounds out of tune, likely because the cold has warped its frame. You smile weakly at the effort, knowing the melody is supposed to lift spirits, yet the sound drifts weakly upward and vanishes into the rafters, where drafts steal it away. Some scholars suggest that music in such conditions functioned less as entertainment and more as a kind of denial, a distraction from the cold reality that comfort was fleeting. A servant carrying a pitcher slips on the damp stones and nearly falls. The liquid inside sloshes, splattering onto the floor, where it freezes in patches before anyone bothers to mop it up. You step carefully around it, realizing that this great hall is as treacherous underfoot as an outdoor street in winter. You draw your cloak tighter, though it barely matters, the fabric is already stiff at the edges, as if the fibers themselves have resigned to ice. The hall's size was meant to impress, to intimidate visiting envoys and rivals. Chroniclers of the time noted that such grand spaces symbolized power more than comfort. Yet standing here, you feel small, diminished, and endlessly cold. You glance back toward the door you entered, but the thought of facing the wind again makes you hesitate. You are trapped, in a sense, not by chains, but by the knowledge that every direction leads only to new forms of misery. The fire pops suddenly, sending sparks skittering across the hearth. A boy rushes forward with tongs to catch a falling ember before it burns into the rush mats on the floor. You realize with a pang of irony that the fire, meant to protect against winter, could just as easily burn the hall down in a moment of carelessness. There's still disagreement about whether medieval castles had reliable methods for smoke control. Some argue chimneys were widespread by the later Middle Ages. Others insist that smoke simply collected in the rafters, escaping only through roof gaps. Looking up now, your eyes sting with irritation, confirming the latter theory. Your stomach growls. You've eaten little since arriving, but the food here is no real consolation. A bowl of pottage, an uninspiring stew of beans, peas, and whatever vegetables survived the frost is placed before you. The steam rises only briefly, curling like a ghost before disappearing. You take a tentative sip, It is lukewarm at best, already surrendering to the cold air. And then the hall doors creak open again. A gust of wind charges inside, scattering straw and snuffing two torches. Everyone groans audibly. For a moment, the cold feels worse than outside, because you had allowed yourself the foolish luxury of half believing you were warming. Now the spell is broken, and you shiver violently, the marrow of your bones quaking with the realization, if the heart of the castle feels like this, what horrors of cold await in the lesser chambers? You sit back on the rough bench, your shoulders hunched, your breath misting before you. Around you, the company continues its business as though this misery were normal, expected, inevitable. That, perhaps, is the most frightening truth. You are the only one still shocked by the cold, still struggling to accept it. To them, this is life. To you, it is already a death sentence whispered through the stone. Your gaze lifts once more to the fire, its embers glowing faintly. You wonder if you should stay planted here all night, hoping to cling to a fragile warmth, or if venturing deeper into the castle might reveal something better. The choice is yours, though either way, you begin to understand. There is no such thing as comfort here. There is only endurance. The fire behind you fades as you step into another passage, narrower and gloomier than the hall. The air here is thick with a clammy chill, and you soon understand why. Fuel is scarce, and hearths in side chambers are often left cold to conserve wood. Your footsteps ring against the stones, and the sound is strangely hollow, as though the castle itself were empty, a cavern where warmth has never been welcome. You follow the scent of smoke toward what should be a chamber of comfort, perhaps a smaller dining space or a side room where lesser guests are fed. Yet when you arrive, you are met with disappointment. A hearth yawns against one wall, its grate bare, filled only with white ash and the faint glimmer of embers long since died. A chill draught snakes down the chimney and across the floor, making the room colder than the corridor outside. You crouch instinctively, blowing on your hands, wishing for a spark that isn't there. What lies on the table is hardly better. A loaf of coarse bread sits untouched, its crust hardened to the density of wood. A clay bowl nearby holds broth that has cooled into a thin, greasy film. Surviving manuscripts tell us that bread and broth were staples for common folk, but in winter, even these could freeze solid if not consumed quickly. Tonight, the bread cracks under your fingers, releasing a smell more sour than nourishing. One curious custom was to soak stale loaves in beer or weak ale, softening them just enough to chew. You picture yourself doing the same, grimacing at the thought of biting into something both mushy and freezing at once. Yet hunger has no pride, and your stomach reminds you that even unappetizing food was survival. You sit briefly on a wooden stool. The cold has seeped into it so thoroughly that it feels like perching on ice. The grain of the wood presses through your cloak, numbing your thighs. You try to ignore it, listening instead to the faint shuffle of rats hidden somewhere in the corners. Their squeaks punctuate the silence, and you realize that you are not the only one seeking nourishment in this chamber. They dart across the rushes, scavenging crumbs, bold in their hunger. You glance upward, and notice the roof beams stained with soot. Drips of melted frost fall occasionally, splashing onto the table below. The dark streaks are evidence of centuries of fires that could never quite conquer the damp. Chroniclers once remarked that the cleanliness of a hearth measured the prosperity of a hall, yet here, prosperity is absent. The room smells of stale smoke, mold, and cold ashes. A dog noses through the rushes near your feet, startling you. Its fur is matted, its tail low, and its ribs show beneath the coat. It finds a crust of bread, chews noisily, and then disappears into shadow again. That's when the door creaks open, letting in a servant with an armful of firewood. She mutters under her breath, annoyed at the empty grate. You watch as she kneels, arranging sticks, striking flint to steel until sparks catch. For a moment, your heart lifts, watching orange flames lick upward. But within minutes, the illusion breaks. The fire burns unevenly, coughing smoke that drifts into the room, making your eyes sting. The heat, such as it is, stays close to the hearth and never reaches your seat. Experts remain divided on whether medieval chimneys truly improved warmth or simply redirected smoke. Standing here, with your lungs irritated and your fingers still numb, you lean toward the latter. You shift closer to the fire, only to feel the damp stones of the hearth radiating cold back at you. It's as though the wall itself swallows the flames. You rest your hand near the blaze, and even then warmth is fleeting. When you pull away, your skin cools instantly, as if mocking your attempt to feel human again. The servant, finished with her task, leaves without a word. The door shuts, and the faint crackle of the fire is all that remains. You sit, listening, half dazed from fatigue. Every flicker of flame promises comfort, but every draught steals it back. You begin to realize why so many medieval chroniclers wrote of winter as a time of despair. Even in a castle, even with walls and servants, the fight against cold was constant, and the victories were temporary. Another drip falls from the rafters. You glance up, startled, and notice frost along the beams. It glitters faintly in the firelight, a cruel decoration. Somewhere outside, wind moans against the walls. The sound seeps into your bones, reminding you that no chamber, no matter how well built, can shut out the season entirely. And so you stand, weary, moving back toward the corridor. The thought of sleep is beginning to lure you, yet the idea of bed in such a place fills you with dread. What kind of sheets await? What kind of chamber could possibly shield you better than this? As you push open the door, another gust greets you, colder than before. The torchlight flickers, and you shiver anew. Somewhere deeper in the castle lies your bedchamber, a place meant for rest. But tonight, you suspect it will be another battlefield, one not fought with swords and arrows, but with cold, hunger, and exhaustion. You tread carefully along another corridor, your boots crunching faintly on rushes that were once fresh but now lie stiff and brittle beneath your soles. They snap like twigs, each step releasing a sour cocktail of odors, stale beer, spilled grease, and the faint reek of human sweat that has seeped into the stalks over long weeks. The cold exaggerates these smells, pressing them upward into your nose, making you flinch even as your toes curl with the chill seeping through thin leather. What seemed at first like an inviting carpet proves a deception. These floor coverings, intended to soften the harsh stone beneath, have absorbed so much moisture that they crunch underfoot like frost-laden grass. Chroniclers of the period noted that rushes were commonly spread in layers across castle floors, sprinkled with herbs such as lavender or thyme to disguise the stench. Tonight, though, the herbs are long faded, and what remains is a pungent blend of rot and damp. A peculiar practice, mentioned in some records, was to add dried mint or even wormwood to the mixture, not for fragrance alone, but because people believed such plants could ward off vermin. Yet as you walk, you see the quick dart of a mouse vanishing into the wall, its tiny claws scratching against stone. Whatever protection those herbs once promised, the rodents have not signed the contract. The chill here is merciless. Your breath hovers before you, white and ghostly, joining a fog already lingering near the ceiling where drafts circulate endlessly. You rub your hands together, but the friction barely makes a difference. The castle's stones seem determined to reclaim every shred of warmth your body produces. You imagine your own heat as a candle flame in a cavernous cave, flickering bravely, but destined to be swallowed. You pause to examine a corner where water drips slowly from the ceiling. A thin icicle has formed against the wall, a fragile dagger gleaming in the torchlight. The sound of each drip echoes like a metronome, a reminder of how moisture invades even the most fortified spaces. Archaeological evidence confirms that medieval interiors often suffered from chronic damp, a condition that could warp wood, weaken plaster, and make every winter an assault on health. The servants who scatter new rushes mutter as they work, their hands raw and red. You watch one spread stalks across the floor, shaking his head at the filth uncovered beneath the old layer, bits of bone, fish scales, and dark stains you'd rather not name. There's still disagreement among scholars as to how frequently these rushes were changed. Some suggest they were replaced seasonally. Others claim only once or twice a year, unless a feast or visit demanded appearances. Tonight, you wouldn't bet your life on the higher estimate. You crouch to touch the rushes yourself. They feel icy, almost slimy with the damp, and you quickly recoil. Your fingertips sting from the cold, as though punished for your curiosity. Standing upright again, you notice how the torchlight casts jagged shadows across the uneven surface, making it appear more like a frozen marsh than a castle corridor. The soundscape here is its own trial. The crackle of rushes, the dripping water, the muffled scurry of vermin all combine into a chorus that keeps your senses on edge. Fatigue weighs on your eyelids, yet sleep seems impossible amid this sensory onslaught. You imagine trying to rest on such a floor, and a shudder travels your spine at the thought of waking with straw frozen to your cheek. In one corner, a wooden chest sits closed, its iron fittings slick with condensation. You run a finger along it and leave a trail of frost. Inside, you suspect, lies linen or garments, perhaps stiffened with ice. There are stories of garments frozen so rigid they stood upright on their own, a half-comical, half-tragic detail from households that fought endlessly against winter. You can picture it now, a servant trying to wriggle into a tunic that cracks at the folds. The corridor eventually opens into a chamber used for eating, though chamber might be too generous a term. Benches line the walls, and the tables bear the scars of knives, the burns of careless candles. You sit for a moment, your body sagging, and realize how little difference this space makes. The rushes are just as hard, the drafts just as cruel, the food just as meager. A jug of water sits near one end of the table. You lift it, expecting a drink, but the liquid inside is solid, sealed beneath a crust of ice. You tip it upside down, and nothing moves. The silence mocks you. To drink, you would have to chip away at the frozen surface, gnawing shards that would chill you further rather than quench your thirst. Reports from travelers confirm that even indoor vessels often froze in harsh winters, their contents transformed into brittle blocks overnight. You set the jug down with a sigh, the hollow thud resounding in the empty room. For a moment, you close your eyes, trying to imagine warmth, comfort, the softness of a modern bed. But the reality intrudes too strongly. Your body aches, your breath mists, your fingers throb with cold. As you rise again, the rushes crunch beneath your boots one last time. Their smell clings to you, acrid and heavy, as though the castle wishes to mark you with its scent. You move on, knowing that deeper chambers still await, and with them, challenges no less harsh than what you've just endured. The torch you carry flickers, its flame sputtering in the draught. You hold it higher, searching for any sign that the next turn of the corridor might reveal warmth. Yet all you see ahead is more stone, more shadow, more promise of suffering. The night is far from over, and already you are beginning to wonder whether a single day here might prove your undoing. You follow the corridor until it opens into a side chamber used for meals, though calling it a supper room feels almost cruel. The air is stagnant, a mixture of smoke and sour beer, and the chill makes every sound brittle, like glass ready to shatter. On the trestle tables lie the remains of a meal, a dark loaf gone hard as stone, a dish of beans congealed into a solid lump, and a pitcher tipped on its side, its contents frozen mid-drip like a captured moment in ice. You sit, weary, and the bench beneath you is so cold it bites straight through your cloak. You pick up a chunk of bread, pressing your thumb into the crust, and it doesn't give way. Instead, it crumbles into dusty shards, scattering onto the rushes below. Records from the period show that bread was often the foundation of every meal, yet in conditions like this, it offers no comfort. Your teeth ache just thinking of trying to chew. At one end of the table sits a shallow bowl of broth, once steaming, now reduced to a skin of grease. You stir it with a spoon, the surface cracking like a pond in early frost. Oddly enough, some accounts mention that such bowls were left overnight to harden, then sliced into portions like jelly the next day. It might sound thrifty, but in your hands it feels like punishment, as if the castle itself mocks your hunger. Your fingers tremble as you raise the spoon, the metal colder than the liquid it carries. When you sip, the taste is flat, faintly bitter, and lukewarm at best. It does nothing to warm you, only dampens your tongue. A peculiar practice in some households was to spice pottage with mustard seed or garlic, not for flavor but in the belief these might heat the body. Tonight, there is no such illusion. Your body only grows heavier with fatigue. You lean back, hearing your breath rasp in the silence. The rushes on the floor release their odor again, and your stomach tightens. This room should be alive with chatter, with the crackle of a hearth, but instead, it feels abandoned, as though the very season has driven life away. A servant enters, her arms full of trenchers. She sets them down with a thump and mutters under her breath. The skin of her hands is cracked, raw from scrubbing pots in cold water. You notice the jug she carries next, a smaller vessel of ale. She pours a cup, and the liquid comes sluggishly, half frozen, as though reluctant to leave the jug at all. Some scholars suggest that ale was safer than water because it carried fewer diseases. Yet in winter it posed its own problem. Freezing solid. You sip from the cup she sets before you. It is sharp, sour, and nearly icy against your lips. It doesn't soothe your throat so much as numb it. You set it down quickly, your teeth already chattering again. Your thoughts drift toward the wealthier households, the noble families with feasts described in ballads, roast meats glistening on platters, pies fragrant with herbs, sweetmeats rolled in honey. But here, in the stark truth of a castle winter, you see the other side. Food that stiffens before it is eaten, drinks that freeze in the jug, and stomachs that ache not from indulgence but from emptiness. In the corner, a dog gnaws a bone left behind. The marrow within is frozen, and he works at it with noisy determination. You envy him in a strange way. At least he knows exactly what to do with his hunger. For you, every mouthful is a negotiation between body and misery. The door rattles suddenly, banging against its hinges as a gust of wind pushes through. Candles flicker violently, shadows jerking across the walls like startled ghosts. For a moment, darkness threatens to swallow the room, and you feel the familiar panic of losing even the smallest flame. When the light steadies again, you notice your breath hanging before you, thicker than before, as if the wind had dragged the outdoors inside. Interpretations vary regarding how medieval families coped with this relentless cold. Some argue that meals were eaten quickly, with everyone huddled close together, their collective body heat serving as the only real insulation. Others suggest that many simply endured, eating sparingly, their minds as numb as their fingers. Sitting here now, staring at the cracked crust of bread and the grey sheen of beans, you suspect both may be true. You try again to eat, tearing at the loaf with your hands. The crust rips unevenly, scraping your palms. The interior is dense, sour, and cold against your tongue. It takes effort to chew, each bite a labor that yields little satisfaction. Your jaw aches, and you force yourself to swallow. The bread sticks halfway, reluctant to slide down your throat. The servant who brought the food now gathers up plates, her expression weary. She glances at you briefly, then looks away, as if embarrassed to witness your struggle. You wonder if she too has eaten yet, or if her own supper is as meager as what lies before you. Time drags here. You feel the chamber pressing in, the cold settling into your bones like silt in water. Your eyelids grow heavy, yet you know there is no rest to be found at this table. To linger would be to freeze slowly, inch by inch, until the morning light never comes. You rise, pushing the bench back with a squeak that echoes in the empty space. Your legs feel stiff, your hands clumsy. The jug of frozen ale glints in the torchlight, a small monument to the futility of this castle's hospitality. And so you turn once again toward the corridor, leaving behind the supper table with its crusts and congealed broth. The cold follows you like a shadow, and your stomach still aches. You realize, with a sinking dread, that hunger will be your companion as surely as frost. In this place, food does not nourish. It only reminds you of how far you are from warmth, comfort, or survival. You shuffle down a narrower stairwell, the torch in your hand throwing shaky light across damp stones. The air grows sharper, biting, and you realize with a dull sigh that thirst is creeping up on you. Hunger gnawed at you earlier, but now your throat feels like parchment rubbed too thin. You long for something as simple as a cup of water, cool, fresh, soothing. Yet in this castle, even water is an adversary. At the bottom of the stairs you find a storage room, the kind where jars and barrels line the walls. Their rounded bodies loom in the shadows like squat sentinels. You reach for one clay jar, its surface cold against your fingers, and lift the lid. What greets you is not liquid but a glimmering slab, hard as glass. The water has frozen into a solid block, a cruel mockery of refreshment. Most historians agree that in colder months, water was unreliable at best. Springs might freeze, cisterns turned to solid ice, and even buckets left near the hearth stiffened overnight. You imagine servants striking the ice with iron rods, breaking it into shards just to ladle out a fraction. The thought makes you wince. How many hands must have blistered on the frozen edges? How many lips cut on jagged pieces? One curious record describes people resorting to chewing snow indoors, as though nature herself had been invited to supper. Yet everyone knew it was dangerous, leaching heat from the body with every bite. You lift a shard from the jar and place it against your lips. It burns rather than soothes, stealing warmth you cannot afford to lose. You set the shard down quickly, rubbing your hands together. The chill has already settled in your teeth, making your jaw ache. You glance around the room, hoping for something else, perhaps ale, wine, or even thin beer. But most vessels you inspect yield the same result, a top layer of ice thick enough to seal the liquid beneath. Archaeological evidence confirms that wells and barrels often froze in harsher winters, forcing desperate households to boil snow or melt ice, a task as endless as it was exhausting. In the corner, you notice a bucket left on the floor. Its rope handle is stiff, frozen into an awkward curl. You tug at it, but the fibers crackle as though they might snap. The bucket itself has a crust of ice running down its side, glittering in the torchlight like a cruel ornament. The irony hits you. Water, the essence of life, is everywhere in this room, but none of it can be drunk without effort that costs more warmth than it gives. The damp smell here is overpowering. Clay, mildew, and faint traces of stale wine mingle with the cold air, making your stomach churn. You wonder if the jars ever smell better in summer, or if this chamber always carries the scent of neglect. Servants would have spent hours here, tending, lifting, storing, and in winter, perhaps cursing. Interpretations vary regarding whether these storerooms were kept warmer with braziers or simply abandoned to freeze. Looking around now, no braziers burn, and silence reigns. You rub your throat, dry and aching. You think of modern comforts, clean taps, warm tea, steaming soup, and the comparison nearly makes you laugh. Here, in a castle meant to symbolize strength and wealth, you are defeated by a jar of ice. The absurdity is sharp enough to sting. Somewhere above, you hear footsteps creaking along the wooden floorboards, faint voices muffled by the stone ceiling. Life goes on, even as thirst remains unanswered. You linger, reluctant to leave, as if staring at the ice long enough might somehow make it melt. But your body knows better, shivering harder with every passing minute. You strike the ice with a spoon found nearby. The sound is a sharp crack that echoes through the room. A shard breaks loose, tumbling into the jar. You fish it out quickly, cupping it in your palm, watching the torchlight refract across its jagged surface. You hesitate before putting it in your mouth, knowing the pain it will bring. But desperation wins. The shard chills your tongue, numbs your teeth, and for a moment you almost feel relief. Then the cold sinks into your jaw, spreading pain along your gums. You spit it out with a groan, your breath misting heavily. The irony continues to gnaw at you. Water surrounds you, but it is as hostile as fire. You begin to grasp why medieval chroniclers described winter as an enemy, a siege that lasted months without mercy. Just as armies could cut off food and water supplies, so too did the season itself, turning daily necessities into trials of endurance. The torch in your hand flickers, its flame bending with a draught sneaking through some unseen crack. You glance at the doorway, suddenly aware that this room is no refuge. It is a prison of thirst, and the longer you stay, the weaker you grow. You return the lid to the jar, the hollow thump resonating in the silence. Your throat is no less dry, your body no less weary. Yet you know you must keep moving. Perhaps somewhere else in this castle, there will be relief. Perhaps a jug not yet frozen solid, or a kitchen where something hot still simmers. The thought drives you back into the corridor, torchlight guiding your steps once more. But the image lingers. Jars of ice, buckets stiff with frost, water turned traitor. You realize with a weary clarity that even the simplest needs are battles here, and thirst, gnawing and insistent, will not leave you any more than the cold does. You've barely shaken off the memory of frozen jars when a guard, broad-shouldered and brisk, beckons you forward. His voice is curt, the kind that doesn't invite refusal. He gestures toward a side chamber where racks of armor stand waiting, their steel and iron glinting in the dim torchlight. At first glance, you might expect these gleaming shells to promise protection, security, the martial dignity of a knight. But step closer, and you realize they are nothing less than prisons of cold. The guard insists you try one on, perhaps as a guest being tested, or simply as a cruel joke at your expense. You reach for a breastplate, your fingers recoiling almost instantly. The metal is so cold it burns, biting your skin as though it were dipped in frost. You flex your hand and find your fingertips still tingling, as if shocked. Chroniclers of the time noted that armor was a daily burden for knights, weighing anywhere from 40 to 60 pounds depending on design. Yet weight was not the worst enemy. In winter, steel absorbed the surrounding chill until it felt like strapping ice directly to the body. Even the bravest warrior could shiver under its embrace. You lower the breastplate over your chest. The sensation is immediate, an invasive, stabbing cold that seeps through your tunic, straight into your ribs. You inhale sharply, the breath catching in your throat. The straps tighten as the guard buckles them, and suddenly your lungs have less room to expand. Every breath becomes shallow, accompanied by the metallic scent of iron lingering in the air. One curious account describes soldiers lining their armor with bits of wool or straw, makeshift padding intended to insulate the body. Yet dampness often crept in, soaking the lining until it clung cold and clammy. You can almost feel it now, the mixture of sweat and frost against your skin, a contradiction both suffocating and freezing. The guard hands you a helmet next. It's heavy, hollow, and when you lower it over your head, the world narrows into a tunnel of sound. Your own breath echoes inside, hot at first, then instantly cooled by the metal surrounding you. Condensation builds near your lips, freezing into tiny crystals before you can draw the next breath. You blink, disoriented, the edges of your vision blurred by darkness. Experts remain divided on whether knights in colder climates preferred to fight with lighter gear during winter. Some argue they shed pieces to avoid frostbite. Others claim duty demanded the full suit, regardless of discomfort. Standing here, locked inside the suffocating embrace of steel, you cannot imagine lasting an hour, let alone marching into battle. You try to move, lifting an arm. The joint creaks, the plates scraping against each other with a metallic groan. The sound reverberates through your ears, louder inside the helmet. Your fingers, trapped in stiff gauntlets, can barely flex. You attempt to close your fist, and the cold metal presses harder into your knuckles, as if mocking the notion of grip. Your breath grows heavier. You realize quickly that the armor doesn't just protect against arrows, it traps your own heat, then robs it, turning sweat into ice. The paradox is suffocating. Each step feels weighted, deliberate, as though the castle floor is pulling you downward. You recall the images of shining knights painted in manuscripts, proud on horseback, banners fluttering behind them. The reality is far less noble. Your shoulders ache, your chest burns with the chill, your teeth chatter inside the echoing helm. A strange little detail survives in some records. Knights complain not only of cold but of the way armor chafed their skin raw, leaving welts and sores that lingered long after the battles ended. You can almost feel it now, the strap digging into your collarbone, the buckle pinching your hip. The guard smirks, as if satisfied by your discomfort. He gestures for you to walk the length of the chamber. You obey, clanking noisily, each step sluggish. The echoes multiply, filling the space with a hollow symphony of metal on stone. Your shoulders slump forward, and you wonder how anyone could endure this for an entire day, let alone an entire campaign. And then it strikes you. If a sudden alarm were raised, if enemies approached under cover of snow, you would be expected to rush into the courtyard, climb icy stairs, and take your place on the battlements dressed like this. Your legs already tremble, your breath fogs inside the helmet, and your hands feel like lumps of ice. The very thought chills you more than the armor itself. Interpretations vary among scholars about whether armor provided any warmth during extended marches. Some argue that movement generated enough body heat to counteract the cold. Others claim the steel acted as a constant siphon, pulling warmth away. Judging by the way your shoulders ache and your fingers numb, you lean toward the latter. You pause halfway across the chamber, chest heaving. The helmet feels smaller now, the air inside stale. You want nothing more than to rip it off, to breathe freely, to shake loose the weight crushing your ribs. But the guard insists you finish the walk, and so you stumble forward, each step a test of will. At last, he unbuckles the straps and lifts the breastplate away. The relief is immediate, though your tunic beneath is damp with condensation. You shiver harder now, stripped of the little warmth your body generated. The helmet comes off next, and you gulp the cold air greedily, as though it was summer wind. You collapse onto a bench, head spinning. The armor sits beside you, lifeless, a husk of metal waiting for its next victim. It looks impressive, undeniably so, but you now understand that it is less a tool of glory and more a burden that magnifies the misery of winter. The guard laughs quietly, shaking his head. To him, this is routine. To you, it is a revelation. In this castle, even the clothing meant to shield life is a weapon wielded by the season itself. And as you peel damp fabric from your skin, you realize just how little protection stands between you and the unrelenting cold. The guard leaves you to catch your breath, and when you finally peel yourself from the bench, another test of endurance awaits. This time it comes not in the form of iron or steel, but in fabric coarse, scratchy wool, piled high in a chest at the side of the chamber. At first glance, the garments seem thick, woven to shield the body from winter. But when you lift one tunic into your hands, you discover that warmth here is never simple. The wool is heavy, its threads rough as straw. You pull the tunic over your head, and at once your skin bristles. The fibers drag across your arms, scraping like sandpaper. Your neck prickles with irritation, your shoulders itch before the fabric even settles. You squirm instinctively, clawing at the collar, but the weight only drags lower, clinging damp against your chest. Surviving manuscripts tell us that wool was the most common defense against cold, prized because it could trap air within its fibers. Yet the reality, as you feel it now, is far from cozy. The garment smells faintly of lanolin and smoke, carrying the farmyard and the hearth with it. And when moisture invades, as it so often does in these drafty walls, the wool grows clammy, soaking up damp like a sponge until it weighs twice as much. One curious custom was to line such garments with linen to reduce the itching, but linen froze quickly when damp, stiffening like paper. Tonight, you wear only wool against your skin, and the sensation is maddening. Your arms redden with scratches each time you shift. It's as though the very clothing meant to comfort you has declared war. You tug a cloak around your shoulders, hoping for improvement. Instead, the weight doubles, the scratchiness multiplies. The edges drag against your hands, rougher than bark. You cough as fibers tickle your throat, tiny threads floating in the air. It is a cruel irony. You long for warmth, yet every layer you add feels like punishment. Most historians agree that medieval people layered heavily in winter, sometimes wearing 3 or 4 tunics at once. Imagine the bulk, the itch, the suffocating heaviness pressing down on every joint. You move your arms experimentally, and even with a single cloak your range of motion shrinks. The fabric clings at your elbows, bunches behind your knees. A short walk feels like trudging through water, every movement resisted by the very garment meant to help. Struggling, you sit again, pressing your back against the cold wall. The damp stone leaches heat even faster now that your sweat has soaked the wool. You close your eyes, willing yourself to ignore the itch, but it grows worse. You scratch your arm, and the relief is fleeting. Red welts rise where your fingernails drag across skin. You wonder how anyone could endure this daily, without complaint. Perhaps they simply grew used to it. Their skin toughened, their nerves dulled. Perhaps discomfort became so normal it ceased to matter. Travelers occasionally remarked on the odor of medieval garments, noting how wool held on to smells long after washing. Here, the truth of that remark fills your nostrils. The cloak reeks faintly of damp sheep, overlaid with kitchen smoke and human sweat. No matter how tightly you pull it around yourself, you cannot escape the stench. It clings like another layer, as suffocating as the cloth itself. You rub your face with your sleeve and feel the coarse fibers scrape your cheek. The itch spreads upward, and you sigh heavily. You imagine modern comforts, a soft cotton hoodie, a fleece blanket, clean laundry pulled warm from a dryer. Compared to this, those luxuries feel like paradise. Here, in the heart of stone and frost, you are reduced to a scratching, shivering figure, bound by wool that refuses to yield. Academic circles continue to debate whether medieval garments provided meaningful insulation, or whether people relied more on fire and body heat from companions. Some argue that coarse wool did preserve life in freezing climates. Others insist its discomfort outweighed its benefits. You cannot solve the debate tonight, but your body leans toward the latter conclusion. Every breath still mists, every joint still trembles, and every inch of your skin burns from irritation. A servant passes through, carrying another bundle of clothing. She pauses briefly, watching you wrestle with the cloak, then shakes her head with a faint smile. To her, your struggle is laughably naive. She has likely worn wool since childhood, learned to ignore the itch, learned to carry the weight. To you, it feels unbearable, as if your very skin were being punished for existing. You try standing again, tugging the cloak tighter, but the movement drags against your knees, making each step awkward. The torchlight flickers across your path, and you stumble slightly, thrown off balance by the drag of cloth. In battle, such clothing might mean death. In daily life, it simply means constant exhaustion. The sound of the fabric rustling becomes its own irritant, harsh, grating, like sand shifting in a sack. Each step whispers against the silence, reminding you that nothing in this castle allows peace. Even your clothes make noise, itch, scrape, suffocate. You stop in the corridor, leaning against the wall again. The cold stone presses through the cloak, undoing whatever feeble warmth the wool tried to trap. You exhale, and your breath fogs once more, mocking the idea that fabric could shield you. It dawns on you that here survival is never clean or comfortable. You must choose between shivering in thin garments or scratching yourself raw in heavy wool. Both paths lead to misery, only of different kinds. And that, perhaps, is the cruelest truth of all. In this castle there is no true comfort, only compromise. You pull the cloak tighter one last time, steeling yourself to continue. The corridor stretches forward, dark and uninviting, but you know rest cannot be found here. Somewhere ahead lies a chapel, a place where prayers rise like smoke, but smoke, as you've already learned, does not bring warmth. And so you walk on, itchy, heavy, weary, your breath the only proof that warmth still clings to you at all. The corridor narrows and then swells outward again, leading you into a space meant to soothe the soul, though not the body. The chapel looms before you, its doorway a pointed arch carved with faintly eroded saints who seem to shiver right along with you. You step inside, expecting perhaps foolishly that a sacred place might be warmer. Instead, the cold greets you like an old acquaintance, sliding across the flagstones and curling upward into your cloak. The air is still, heavy with the mingled scents of wax and damp plaster. Your breath joins the faint haze already clinging in the shadows, a ghostly fog that hovers just below the vaulting ceiling. The sound of your boots echoes with a hollow finality, as though each step is a drumbeat announcing that warmth will not be found here. A handful of candles flicker on the altar, their flames valiantly upright, yet pitifully small. They throw golden halos onto the stone walls, but the glow barely stretches beyond a few feet. You move closer, seeking refuge in their light, but their warmth is almost non-existent. It's well recorded in medieval accounts that chapels were among the coldest rooms in a castle, designed with lofty ceilings and thin windows to reach heaven with light rather than protect earthbound bodies from drafts. Oddly enough, some chronicles describe monks rubbing their hands together so vigorously during winter prayers that the sound echoed like the rasp of sandpaper. Tonight, you can almost imagine it. Your own fingers twitch in sympathy, aching for circulation. You press your palms together as though in devotion, partly for piety, mostly for friction. You sit on a narrow bench near the front. The wood is unyielding, its grain polished not by comfort, but by centuries of restless bodies shifting in the cold. You settle reluctantly, pulling your cloak close, but the itch of the wool is now amplified by the icy air. The fibers scrape against reddened skin, making prayer a trial in itself. At the altar, a priest drones softly, his breath misting as he speaks. Each syllable hangs visible in the air before it drifts upward like incense. His voice is steady, but you wonder if even he feels the bite of winter gnawing his bones. The liturgy is meant to be timeless, comforting, eternal, but tonight it feels like another endurance test, one you did not volunteer for. Travelers' notes often mention the peculiar paradox of medieval worship. The soul lifted toward heaven, even as the body froze on earth. Here the paradox is palpable. The chapel aspires to the divine, yet your feet, numb within damp boots, remind you how thoroughly human you remain. You notice the colored glass of the windows, reds and blues catching faint candlelight. By day they might blaze with stories of saints, but now they only leak draughts through imperfect seams. You can hear the faint whistle of air pushing through, a soft, mocking tune. Interpretations vary regarding how well medieval glazing kept out the elements. Some scholars argue it improved warmth marginally, others insist it was decorative alone. Judging by the sting on your cheek, you'd place your coin on the latter. You close your eyes, trying to follow the cadence of prayer, yet distraction creeps in. Your shoulders ache from the weight of wool. Your knees protest against the frozen bench. You cough quietly, the sound startling in the otherwise hushed chamber. For a moment, the priest glances your way, his eyes calm but unreadable. He has seen this before. You realize outsiders struggling, bodies rebelling against the holy chill. Behind you, a family kneels, their children bundled in cloaks that reach the floor. One boy shivers visibly, his lips pale, his head lolling against his mother's shoulder. She adjusts her shawl, wrapping it tighter, but it does little good. The image stays with you, a quiet reminder that no one is immune, not even the innocent. A strange little practice survives in records. Some congregants carried heated stones wrapped in cloth to church, clutching them in their laps during long services. The idea seems clever until you imagine the stone cooling halfway through Mass, leaving nothing but a lump of disappointment. You glance around but see no such stones here, only hands clenched white with cold. The priest raises his hands, intoning a final blessing. The sound rolls through the vaulted ceiling, amplified by stone, and fades slowly into silence. You half expect applause not out of joy, but sheer relief. Instead, the congregation stands stiffly, joints cracking, feet shuffling. The service is over, but the cold remains, stubborn as ever. As you rise, your knees creak in protest, a sound that makes you feel much older than you are. You shuffle toward the doorway, grateful to be leaving yet dreading the corridors beyond. The chapel has given you no warmth, no respite. It has only layered your discomfort with solemnity, as though to remind you that suffering is not incidental but integral here. Outside the chapel, the air feels no different, perhaps even harsher, after the stillness within. You pause, rubbing your arms, and glance back once. The candles flicker faintly in the distance, their glow barely reaching the threshold. They seem more like warnings than comforts, beacons of how little light stands against so much dark. And so you move on, breath misting, skin itching, body weary. You realize with a heavy clarity that even faith, however strong, cannot burn away frost. The castle has no sanctuary, not in halls, not in chambers, not even in the house of God. You step back into the open air, and the courtyard's wind slaps your face like a wet cloth left too long in the freezer. For a moment, you think the cold might actually be refreshing after the suffocating stillness of the chapel. But then the odor hits you, sour and unmistakable, carried upward by currents of air swirling around the walls. You follow your nose toward the moat, drawn less by curiosity and more by the grim inevitability that in this castle, even the landscape is another torment. The moat lies beneath the outer curtain wall, a wide trench encircling stone like a hungry mouth. In summer, it might bubble with foul water, a stew of weeds and waste. But in winter, it is no less offensive, only transformed. The surface is sealed with ice, opaque and yellowish in patches, like glass hiding unpleasant secrets. Yet even the frost cannot fully bury the stench. It seeps through cracks, a rotten exhalation that makes your stomach tighten. Records from the period show that moats were rarely the sparkling, defensive features of fairy tales. More often, they doubled as refuse pits, catching not only rainwater but chamber pot waste, animal dung, and food scraps hurled from windows above. Standing here, you realize the truth of those accounts. The air reeks of decay, sharp enough to sting your nostrils. One curious note from travelers describes fish surviving in these waters, feeding on what the castle threw away. Tonight, you doubt any living thing could endure it. Yet frozen beneath the surface, shapes linger, perhaps dead carp, perhaps refuse, perhaps worse. The ice locks them in place, preserving them like grotesque relics on display. You lean over the parapet, the stone rim cold beneath your gloved hands. The ice below is uneven, cracking in lines that suggest fragility. A shard of wind lifts the stink into your mouth, and you cough involuntarily. Your throat burns with bile. You pull back quickly, but the smell clings to you, woven into your cloak as if determined to follow. Some scholars suggest moats were occasionally drained and cleaned, though others doubt such efforts were common. The debate continues, unresolved, but looking at this frozen pit, you know what side you'd take. No servant here has scraped muck from this trench in months, maybe years. The waste of generations sits entombed, only waiting for Thor to release its revenge. You imagine for a moment what summer must be like, the ice gone, the stench magnified tenfold. Perhaps winter is the kinder season after all, when the frost at least muffles the rot. The thought chills you more than the wind. Comfort here is not relief, but lesser suffering. You notice tracks along the ice, small paw prints, likely from dogs or rats brave enough to scavenge. They wind toward the moat's edge, then vanish where the surface darkens. Did the creature fall through? Did the ice swallow it? You shiver, the image sticking in your mind. The moat is not just foul, it is a trap, silent and waiting. The sound here is different too. Wind whistles across the frozen surface, echoing against stone. It creates a hollow resonance, almost like a pipe organ out of tune. The note rises and falls, mournful and eerie, a soundtrack to misery. You step back from the parapet, uneasy, as though the moat itself were breathing. A servant trudges by, tossing a bucket's contents over the wall. The waste lands with a dull thud on the ice, shattering into chunks. You grimace at the sight. This is daily life, practical and unremarkable to those who live here. But to you, it is shocking, revolting, unforgettable. Interpretations vary regarding whether people of the Middle Ages noticed the smell as sharply as we do today. Some argue they were accustomed, dulled by constant exposure. Others believe complaints were common, even among nobles. Judging by the servant's blank face as she hurls refuse, it seems habit has dulled her senses. Yours, however, remain painfully awake. You step away, but the stench follows. It has a weight, clinging to your tongue and nostrils. You wonder how the inhabitants sleep at night, their chambers just above these frozen depths. Perhaps their dreams are filled with it. Perhaps they no longer notice at all. The moat teaches you something cruel. Castles were not fortresses of romance, but of necessity. They endured because their occupants endured, not because they provided comfort. And endurance meant living with filth, breathing decay, and pretending the stench was simply part of the air. You wrap your cloak tighter and retreat from the wall. Yet the smell seems embedded in your very skin, as though the moat has marked you. The night grows darker, the wind sharper, but the odor remains the worst companion yet. Hunger you could bear, thirst you could wrestle, cold you could curse. But this lingering rot is insidious, burrowing deeper than any frost. And as you turn toward the tower stairs, the realization strikes you with bitter clarity. In this castle, even the air itself is your enemy. You put distance between yourself and the moat's reek, though the memory of it still clings to your senses like smoke in hair. The guard who mocked you earlier now gestures toward a narrow spiral staircase, winding upward into the belly of a tower. His command is clear enough. Climb. The torchlight sputters as you ascend, the air thinning and sharpening with each step. By the time you reach the wooden trapdoor at the top, your legs ache and your chest heaves, but you're met not with rest, only the punishment of the elements. The door creaks open, and the world outside strikes like a blow. The tower platform greets you with a gust so sharp it feels alive, slicing through wool and cloak as though they were paper. You stagger, nearly losing your footing, as the wind roars with nothing to stop it. No trees, no walls, no kindness, only the sky stretching wide and hostile. It's well documented in medieval garrison records that towers were notoriously cold, exposed on all sides. Guards rotated frequently because frostbite could set in within hours. Looking around, you realize why. The stones beneath your boots glitter with a sheen of ice, and your breath snatches away instantly, stolen by the gale. You lean into it, yet still it pushes, as if determined to fling you from the battlements. One curious account from a French castle mentions guards stuffing rags into their ears to block the howling wind, not for warmth but simply for sanity. You can relate. The sound here is deafening, a constant wail that rises and falls, mocking you with its persistence. It seems to carry voices within it, whispers, howls, groans of unseen ghosts. You tug your cloak tighter, but the wind finds every seam, every weakness, pressing icy fingers against your ribs. Your eyes water instantly. Tears freeze at the corners, stiffening into brittle crusts. You blink, but the lashes stick for a heartbeat before releasing. The view might be breathtaking in daylight, rolling hills, distant forests, maybe a ribbon of river. But now, under a moonless sky, all you see is darkness broken by faint glimmers of snow across the fields. The void stretches endlessly, a reminder of how small you are against the winter. Chroniclers noted that guards were expected to keep watch through the night, pacing to stay awake, stamping their boots to keep blood flowing. You attempt the same, stomping once, twice, but your feet ache within their stiff leather. The rhythm does nothing against the bone-deep cold. Each exhale leaves you weaker. Each inhale burns your throat raw. You glance at the guard beside you, his expression blank, his nose red, his lashes white with frost. He doesn't complain, doesn't even frown. Perhaps he's too numb for either. His hand grips a spear, knuckles swollen and pale. He shifts his weight mechanically, as though habit alone sustains him. You marvel at his endurance, and yet pity him because endurance here is indistinguishable from suffering. Some researchers argue that tower watch duty was rotated every hour in winter, though others claim men sometimes remained for double shifts when understaffed. Standing here, you can't imagine lasting half an hour. The wind gnaws your ears, your jaw aches from clenching, and your skin feels stretched thin, ready to split. You pace toward the wall, peering over. Below, the moat glimmers faintly, sealed and silent. Beyond, nothing moves, no raiders, no armies, not even animals daring to cross the snow. And yet you must keep watch, because the cold is no excuse for dereliction. That is the cruelty of the castle. Defense first, humanity second. A gust stronger than the rest nearly knocks you sideways. You grab at the wall, your hand sticking briefly to the frozen stone before you wrench it free. Your palm throbs where the skin peeled slightly. The guard beside you doesn't flinch, doesn't even notice. He is already lost to the rhythm of misery. Eyes glazed, body stiff. You wonder if he feels anything at all anymore. There's still disagreement among historians whether guards were given wine or ale to stave off cold, or if sobriety was enforced even in these extremes. Some suggest small rations of hot broth were brought up, but standing here, you see no sign of such kindness. No servant climbs the tower now. No comfort arrives. The only gift you receive is more wind, more dark, more silence. You huddle against the wall, trying to shield yourself, but the stone radiates cold rather than protection. Your cloak flaps violently, whipping against your legs until the itch of the wool almost becomes unbearable again. You press your forehead into your hands, shivering so hard your teeth knock together like castanets. The minutes stretch endlessly. You lose track of time, unsure if 10 or 20 have passed. The wind is relentless, indifferent to your suffering. You think of warm kitchens, of firesides, of beds piled with blankets. The comparison is so absurd it almost makes you laugh, though the sound would freeze before it leaves your lips. A distant bell tolls, muffled by the gale. Relief floods you. It must be the signal for rotation, the call that someone else will take your place. You look toward the stairwell, praying for footsteps. But none come. The bell may be for something else, perhaps the hour of prayer, perhaps the changing of guards elsewhere. Here, no one arrives. You are trapped in this icy purgatory, counting heartbeats, hoping for mercy. Finally, the guard beside you stirs. He taps your shoulder, nodding toward the stairs. His lips are cracked, his voice too faint to hear over the wind, but his meaning is clear. You're done. At least for now. You descend quickly, stumbling as warmth, or what little exists below, beckons. The spiral stairwell seems almost cozy after the tower, though the stone is as damp and cold as ever. You breathe deeply, lungs aching from the transition. Your body shakes uncontrollably, not with fear but with sheer exhaustion. You made it down alive, but you understand now why these towers were dreaded posts. And as you step back into the corridor, the echo of the wind still screams in your ears. You realize that survival here is never about comfort. It is only about endurance. Endurance of smells, endurance of garments, endurance of winds that strip you to the bone. One day in this castle already feels like a lifetime. You descend from the tower, ears still ringing with the roar of the wind, and find yourself walking deeper into the castle's service passages. These are narrower, lower, and filled with the faint hum of life, voices hushed, footsteps hurried, the rustle of cloth. You turn a corner and stumble upon the servants' quarters, a long, low room tucked behind the kitchens. You expect bustle, maybe even warmth from ovens nearby, but what you see instead is a scene of exhaustion and shared misery. The room is dim, its only light coming from a few guttering tallow candles. The air smells of smoke, onions, and unwashed bodies. Along the floor lie pallets of straw, some covered with rough cloth, most bare. Here, servants huddle together for sleep, bundled in rags, their breath rising in visible plumes that mingle into a cloud just above their heads. Contemporary records confirm that servants often slept communally in such spaces, without privacy, without true bedding, relying only on body heat and thin cloaks to carry them through the night. You see this truth before you. Limbs overlap, shoulders press against shoulders, and children curl into their mothers' sides like small animals burrowing for warmth. One odd detail survives in some accounts. Rushes on the floor were sometimes changed in servants' rooms less often than in noble chambers, leaving layers of straw, food crumbs, and vermin droppings beneath. You catch the proof when you hear the skitter of tiny claws in the darkness, followed by a muffled squeal as someone kicks at the straw. A rat dashes across your path, bold and hungry. The servant's clothing is pitifully thin. You see one woman wrapped in a cloak so patched it looks like a quilt of scraps. A boy has only a tunic, his knees poking out blue from the cold. They lie close to the hearth wall, but the stones are cold. No fire burns here. The heat is reserved for the kitchen itself, and even there it is fleeting. You kneel briefly beside one pallet. The straw is damp, heavy with the smell of mildew. You imagine trying to sleep here, your body pressed against strangers, your ears filled with coughs and whispers, your nose stung by the stench of smoke and sour wool. Comfort would be impossible. Rest would be shallow at best. Most historians agree that servants bore the brunt of castle hardships. Nobles at least had bedchambers, blankets, and fires, even if they weren't always effective. For the lower ranks, there was no such luxury. To them, survival meant sharing warmth and enduring filth together. Watching now, you realize how easily disease could spread in such close quarters. A single cough echoes across the room, and heads stir uneasily. There's still disagreement about whether servants were ever given furs or decent blankets during the coldest nights. Some argue yes, when households were wealthy or merciful. Others insist servants were left to make do with whatever scraps they had. Judging by the thinness of the coverings here, the latter feels closer to the truth. The sounds of the room are as telling as its smells. The steady chorus of teeth chattering, the occasional whimper of a child, the wheeze of someone ill. It is a lullaby of suffering. You sit silently, listening, your own breath joining theirs. The weight of it presses down, heavier than any armor. You shift your cloak around your shoulders, itching as the wool bites again, and feel a pang of guilt. Even with its discomfort, your cloak is more than many here possess. A girl near the corner has nothing but a sack pulled over her body, holes cut for arms. She shivers violently, her lips parted, her eyes half open, even in supposed sleep. Oddly enough, some chronicles note that servants sometimes slipped into the kitchens at night to sleep closer to the embers. Risking the wrath of their masters, they sought out ovens for even a trace of warmth. Looking at the girl in her sackcloth, you can understand why. A beating or scolding might be preferable to freezing in this hovel. You realize, too, that these servants cannot leave. They belong to the castle as much as the stones do. If winter rages outside, they are trapped within. If famine comes, their rations shrink first. If disease spreads, their palates become breeding grounds. Their shivering tonight is not incidental. It is the baseline of their lives. The candles burn lower, the wicks spitting faintly. Shadows grow long, deepening the sense of despair. You notice that even in sleep, the servants clutch each other tightly. A boy clings to his sister's arm. Two women press back to back, their breath fogging the air between them. The instinct is primal, animal, and entirely human. Interpretations vary regarding how much compassion nobles showed their staff during such winters. Some letters suggest concern, offering small gifts of food or cloth. Others remain silent, implying indifference. In this chamber, you sense little of generosity. The servants endure alone, their suffering unseen by the lords above. You rise slowly, careful not to disturb the fragile nests of straw. The stench follows you as you step into the corridor again, smoke, sweat, mildew, and despair. It clings worse than the wool, sinking into your memory. As you walk away, you hear one last cough, ragged and deep. The sound follows you down the passage like a shadow. It reminds you that in this castle, suffering is never contained to one room. It seeps outward, like cold air through every crack, until the whole fortress breathes it. And you begin to wonder, if the servants shiver like this, what chance do you have? You, unaccustomed, fragile, untrained for such endurance? The question weighs on you with every step. From the servants' den you move upward again, following the faint echo of laughter, clinking cups, and the low hum of music. It feels strange to hear merriment after such bleak silence, but the sound pulls you toward a vast chamber, the banquet hall, prepared for the lord and his guests. For a moment, you might imagine warmth, abundance, and glittering comfort. Yet as soon as you step inside, the illusion cracks. The hall is impressive, no doubt long trestle tables laid with platters of roasted meat, pitchers of wine and ale, trenchers piled high. Candles blaze in iron chandeliers, sending light skittering across the vaulted ceiling. Minstrels strum near the dais, their melodies thin but cheerful. Nobles in velvet and fur gather around the high table, their rings glittering, their goblets raised. From afar, the scene resembles the fairy tale image of a castle feast. But walk closer, and you notice the draught first. It snakes under the heavy doors, slips between the cracks in stone, and dances freely through the hall. The flames on the candles gutter with every gust, smoke curling toward the beams above. The nobles laugh louder to cover the sound of their teeth chattering. Contemporary chronicles often praise the grandeur of these feasts, noting the exotic spices, the lavish spreads, the procession of servants bearing dishes. Yet those same texts rarely describe the chill that permeated everything. Tonight you see the truth. Even velvet cannot stop a draught. Even fur-lined cloaks cannot smother a winter wind. One peculiar custom mentioned in records was the use of mulled wine, steeped with cloves and cinnamon, to bring warmth to the body. Indeed, several goblets here steam faintly, their scent sweet and sharp. Yet the heat vanishes almost instantly, leaving behind tepid spiced liquid. Guests sip eagerly, then frown as the drink cools before they finish. You approach one table and see a roast bird, golden skin glistening. At first it looks appetizing, but touch it and you find the meat already stiff, the fat solidifying white along the edges. Even delicacies cannot escape the castle's chill. A guest spears a slice, chews bravely, and nods, though his jaw works harder than it should. The illusion of pleasure must be maintained, even as cold mocks the feast. The musicians valiantly strumming suffer most visibly. Their fingers are red, stiff, and tremble against the strings. One lute sounds slightly off-key, likely warped by damp. A drumbeat echoes, but each strike seems slower, more reluctant. They smile for the nobles, but you can see the desperation in their eyes. Archaeological evidence from castle sites shows that large halls often had only a single great hearth, no matter their size. Tonight proves it true. The fire at the far end blazes, but only those within a few paces enjoy its gift. Beyond that circle, cold reigns. You see lords tugging cloaks tighter, ladies rubbing hands beneath the table, courtiers shifting constantly to keep blood moving. Oddly enough, some accounts describe dogs lying near the tables during feasts, partly to catch scraps, partly for warmth. Sure enough, a hound curls underfoot, its body pressed against a lady's gown. She doesn't move him, perhaps his warmth is worth the nuisance. Your seat, if offered, would be far from the hearth. You imagine the experience: stiff bread, cooling meat, spiced wine gone flat, and your breath misting in front of your goblet. The conversation would swirl around you, noble voices laughing, yet every cough and sneeze betrays the reality. Even wealth cannot buy comfort here. Scholars still debate whether the grandeur of such feasts was more political theatre than genuine indulgence. Some argue the sheer display of food mattered more than its consumption. Others suggest nobles truly relished what they had, drafts and all. Tonight, it feels like theatre. The food looks magnificent, but tastes dull. The clothes shimmer, but scratch. The laughter rings, but trembles. You study the Lord himself, seated at the head beneath a canopy. His fur cloak gleams with sable. His cup of silver shines in the candlelight. Yet his cheeks are flushed raw, his nose reddened by cold. He forces cheer into every word, raising his voice to proclaim hospitality. But you notice the way his hands linger near the fire, fingers spread wide. Even he cannot mask the truth. The servants, darting back and forth, stumble slightly on damp rushes, balancing platters heavy with meat. They know the feast is for show, not for them. Their lips are pale, their movements weary. A dropped trencher earns a sharp glare, though the clatter is soon muffled beneath music and chatter. The performance must not falter. Interpretations vary regarding whether nobles truly believed their halls conveyed warmth and strength, or if they merely pretended, convinced their guests to pretend too. What you see tonight is a room full of performance, meat cooling, wine chilling, laughter strained. The facade is as thin as parchment, torn easily by the next gust of wind. You notice too the food left behind, congealed fat glistening on platters, pies half-eaten with crusts hardening at the edges, jellies trembling in the draught until they collapse. Tomorrow, some of these scraps will feed the servants, others the dogs, and some will simply rot. Waste feels obscene when you recall the shivering bodies you left behind the kitchens. The music falters briefly, and the hall grows quiet enough for you to hear the wind whistling through a crack in the wall. The sound chills you deeper than any bite of cold meat. It reminds you that the castle is not a fortress against winter, it is merely a container, and winter pours through every gap. You retreat from the hall, the smell of roast meat clinging faintly to your cloak, mingling unpleasantly with wool and smoke. Behind you, nobles laugh louder, servants scurry faster, musicians strum harder. The feast continues, but you know the truth. Warmth is a mask, slipping constantly, never able to cover the bones of this place. And as you step back into the corridor, the draught follows you, proof that no amount of velvet or fur can buy escape. In the end, everyone in this castle is united not by feast or prayer, but by cold. You leave behind the forced cheer of the feast, the mingled smells of meat and smoke clinging to your cloak, and make your way toward a chamber promised as your place of rest. Your body aches for it, legs heavy, eyes raw from smoke, throat dry from cold air. The very thought of lying down seems like salvation. But once again, the castle is eager to disappoint. The servant guiding you pushes open a heavy oak door. Inside, a bed awaits, canopied, with curtains drawn halfway. At first glance it looks inviting, a nest of linen and wool. Yet when you press your hand to the mattress, you recoil. The sheets are icy, stiff like parchment left too long in a snowdrift. The blankets, though layered thick, have absorbed damp. Their weight is oppressive, not comforting, as if the bed were trying to pin you beneath its frozen bulk. It's well recorded in household accounts that noble beds were stuffed with straw, feathers if you were wealthy. Tonight, it feels as though someone forgot the feathers. The straw crunches beneath your touch, releasing a faintly sour odor. The damp has turned it musty, heavy with mildew. You imagine lying down, inhaling that smell for hours, your breath clouding against the canopy above. A peculiar practice mentioned in some records was to place warming pans filled with hot coals beneath the sheets before sleep. You glance around, but see no such device. Either the household is too poor or too careless, or simply expects you to endure. The linens remain as they are, cold, clammy, and unforgiving. You sit on the edge of the bed, testing it. The chill seeps through instantly, biting your thighs. You shift uncomfortably, but there's no escaping it. The fabric grips your skin like icy hands, clinging wherever you press. You rub your palms together, blow into them, then slide between the sheets. For a moment, the sensation is so shocking that you gasp aloud. The fabric clings to you, stiff and freezing, as though you've wrapped yourself in a garment pulled straight from the river in midwinter. Most historians agree that castles lacked anything resembling modern insulation. Fires were few, hearths unreliable, and bedchambers often went unheated. You feel the truth in every breath as your lungs seize slightly, the air colder than what you faced in the corridors. The canopy overhead traps no warmth, only shadows. Oddly enough, some diaries mention sleepers wearing layers of clothing to bed, shirts, cloaks, even boots just to endure. You pull your cloak tighter around you and lie stiff, trying not to move. Each shift brings a new icy patch against your skin, a fresh insult. You curl into yourself, knees to chest, but the cold is relentless, pressing in from every side. The silence here is deceptive. At first, it seems restful, but soon you notice the creaks of timber contracting in the chill, the faint drip of water sliding down stone, the distant scratching of rodents in the walls. Sleep does not feel possible. Instead, you lie alert, your body trembling. Some researchers argue that noble beds, despite their discomfort, were status symbols more than true refuges. The canopy, the curtains, the embroidered linens, these were for show, to display wealth to visitors. Actual warmth was secondary. Lying here now, shivering in finery that offers no relief, you realize how cruelly accurate that island. You try to close your eyes, but even your eyelids ache with cold. Your nose tingles, your lips dry and crack. You shift again, and the straw beneath rustles, releasing another puff of stale odor. You cough, muffled beneath the blanket, and the sound seems too loud in the empty room. A draft sneaks in through the shuttered window, carrying a faint whistle. You glance toward it, noticing frost clinging to the edges of the frame, glowing faintly in moonlight. The frost spreads in patterns, like delicate ferns etched into glass. Beautiful. Yes, but beauty does not warm you. You shiver harder, teeth chattering despite your efforts to still them. A strange little detail emerges in some accounts. Nobles sometimes slept sitting up, propped against pillows, partly from fear of choking, partly because lying flat felt suffocating in such cold. You try leaning against the headboard, but the wood is icy, pressing into your spine like a frozen plank. You slump forward again, defeated. You wonder briefly if servants sleep better in their crowded straw nests, at least sharing heat with each other. Here, in solitude, the cold feels personal, as though it has singled you out. Loneliness deepens the chill, amplifying every tremor of your body. Interpretations vary about whether people grew accustomed to these conditions, or if they suffered silently night after night. Perhaps tolerance builds, perhaps numbness takes over. But for you, tonight, the castle has stripped away every illusion. A bed is not a sanctuary. It is another battlefield, one where you lie still while frost conquers inch by inch. You pull the covers tighter, burying your face, but the damp wool smells of smoke and sweat. You cough again, eyes watering, and roll onto your side. The straw shifts beneath, scratching your skin through the linen. You close your eyes, willing sleep to come, but your body resists, shivering violently, heart racing. Rest is as distant as the Sunday. The minutes crawl, each one marked by a new ache, a fresh shiver, a deeper numbness. You think of modern beds, mattresses that cradle, blankets soft and dry, rooms sealed against drafts. Compared to this, those luxuries feel like fantasies from another world. Here, in your freezing chamber, reality is harsher, simpler, endure or perish. And as you lie awake, teeth clenched, fingers stiff, you realize with bitter clarity that even the promise of rest has betrayed you. In this castle, sleep is not comfort. Sleep is survival, wrestled from the jaws of frost. You lie stiff beneath the frozen weight of the blankets, your body aching, when a faint noise interrupts the silence. At first, you think it's the creak of timber again, or the sigh of wind through the shutters. But no, it's sharper, quicker, a scratching, like nails on stone. You freeze, listening. The sound comes again, then multiplies. Skitters, squeaks, tiny thuds in the darkness around you. And then you realize you are not alone in this bedchamber. From the corner of the room, two small shapes dart across the floor, noses twitching, tails whipping behind them. Rats, drawn not by courage, but by warmth. They slip beneath the bed curtains as though this is their home, not yours. You hold your breath, every nerve alert. One pauses, its whiskers brushing the straw-stuffed mattress beneath you. The other scurries up to the foot of the bed, sniffing the air as if weighing its chances. Household records and complaints written by castle clerks confirm that rodents were an inescapable part of life. They thrived on scraps, crumbs, and waste, slipping easily through cracks in stone. Tonight, you meet this truth firsthand. One curious entry in a steward's account mentions cats kept inside for pest control, though cats themselves were not always enough. You glance around desperately, but see no feline guardian here, only shadows moving across the rush-strewn floor. The rats continue their exploration, bold and tireless, as though they know you are too weak with cold to chase them. You shift slightly, and the blanket rustles. The rats freeze, ears perked, bodies taut. For a moment, you hope they'll flee. Instead, 1 inch closer, drawn by the faint smell of supper clinging to your cloak. You remember the greasy broth, the stale bread, and realize that crumbs must have scattered across your clothes. You are bait without meaning to be. Archaeological digs of castle sites have revealed gnawed bones, rat droppings, even the remains of rodent nests tucked into wall crevices. That knowledge feels less academic now, more intimate. Somewhere in the chamber wall behind you, you hear a chorus of squeaks, tiny voices rising and falling. An entire colony is hidden there, alive and restless. The rat at the foot of your bed climbs a little higher, claws clicking faintly on the wood. You flinch, your heart pounding, but you don't cry out. The thought of waking others' guards, servants, feels pointless. This is not unusual to them. This is routine. Only you still shudder. Oddly enough, some chronicles describe rats being tolerated because they help dispose of scraps. The thought makes you grimace. Tonight, they are no helpers, they are intruders, thieves, scavengers of both food and warmth. And as they sniff at your boots, you realize they are also bold enough to crawl across you if it suits them. You tug your blanket tighter, shielding your legs, though the fabric offers no protection against claws. The itch of wool combines with the fear of tiny paws, and suddenly your skin crawls with a double misery. Every hair on your body stands up. The smell in the room changes too. Beneath the odors of damp straw and smoke, you catch the musky scent of fur and waste. It clings to the air, sharp and sour. You wrinkle your nose, but there is no escaping it. The rats are as much a part of this bedchamber as the mattress or the canopy. Experts remain divided on whether rodents played a significant role in the spread of medieval diseases, or whether fleas carried on their backs were the true culprits. But in this moment, you are less concerned with theory than with the sound of claws scratching closer. You swat blindly at the foot of the bed, and the rat darts away, squealing. For a heartbeat, silence returns. Then the scurrying resumes, multiplied, as though you've stirred the nest rather than frightened it. You sit upright, breath fogging, cloak tight around your shoulders. Your eyes dart across the chamber, catching only glimpses of movement in the dim light. The squeaks grow louder, echoing in the rafters, behind the walls, under the bed. You are surrounded. The thought of sleep vanishes. How could you surrender to rest with claws and whiskers so near? You picture yourself drifting off, only to wake with a rat on your chest, its teeth testing your fingers for crumbs. The image alone is enough to make your stomach churn. A strange little custom is mentioned in some sources. People hung food in baskets from rafters to keep it from vermin. Yet warmth could not be hung out of reach. Tonight, you are the source of heat, and they will find you. You push back the covers, deciding you would rather face the cold of the corridor than the scurry of rodents. Your boots thud on the floor, startling several into the shadows. Their eyes glint briefly in the candlelight before vanishing. The silence that follows is worse than the noise. You know they are still there, watching, waiting. You open the chamber door, and a draft rushes in. The air is colder, sharper, but cleaner. For a moment, you breathe deeply, almost grateful for the bite of frost compared to the stench of vermin. You step into the hall, leaving the bed behind. Yet you know the rats will reclaim it the moment you're gone. In truth, it was theirs all along. As you walk away, the itch of wool still burns on your skin. But now another sensation lingers, phantom claws brushing your legs, tiny feet scampering across your chest. The memory will not leave you soon. And you realize that in this castle, even rest is hunted. If the cold doesn't drive you mad, the creatures seeking your warmth will. Either way, the night offers no peace. The corridor is silent but not comforting. Your boots echo faintly as you walk, breath misting in the chill. And then, out of all bodily needs, one strikes with inconvenient urgency. You've eaten little, drunk less, but still your body insists. Nature will not wait for spring. The nearest privy is down a side passage, and though every step there feels like a punishment, the alternative waiting feels worse. You find the small wooden door set into a thick stone wall. It looks ordinary, even humble, but when you push it open, the cold inside hits you like a slap. The privy is worse than outside. Here, stone funnels the air directly from the moat below, carrying a stench that rises like a ghost. The smell is sharp, sour, clinging instantly to your throat. Your stomach turns as you step inside. Medieval household accounts confirm that privies were often positioned above moats or cesspits, practical in theory but brutal in reality. Tonight you learn the truth. Efficiency does not mean comfort. The hole cut into the wooden bench is rimmed with frost, its surface sparkling faintly in torchlight. You stare at it with dread, knowing what must be done. One curious record mentions people bringing warm stones wrapped in cloth to sit upon, easing the shock. No such kindness greets you here. You lower yourself cautiously, and the sensation is so sharp you gasp aloud. Cold wood burns worse than iron, numbing instantly, spreading through your body like ice water. You grit your teeth, half rising again, but the necessity is stronger. You endure, each second dragging like an eternity. The stench intensifies as the draft rises. Beneath you, the pit is partially frozen, its surface uneven, slick, and grotesque. Shapes glimmer in the ice, refuse, scraps, things better left unnamed. The wind funnels upward, carrying the reek straight into your face. You cough, eyes watering, and nearly stumble backward. Chroniclers of the time rarely mentioned latrines, but when they did, it was often to describe how dreadful they became in winter. Some even wrote of accidents, of people slipping, of deaths unspoken in polite company. Tonight, with your boots sliding slightly on damp stone, you understand. One wrong movement and the pit could claim you too. You hurry, desperate to finish. Every second a battle between cold, stink, and humiliation. Your fingers fumble with stiff cloth, the wool heavier now with sweat and damp. You wonder bitterly if the lords above ever faced this misery, or if they had chamber pots in their rooms. Some historians argue nobles enjoyed private garderobes with slightly less draught. Others insist all castle folk shared the same misery. Judging by the smell here, you doubt anyone escaped entirely. The torch sputters as a gust surges upward. For a moment, the light dims, shadows multiplying on the walls. You imagine the flame dying completely, leaving you in blackness, trapped above a frozen pit. The thought makes your skin crawl worse than the rats ever did. You steady the torch with a trembling hand, praying silently it holds. A splash echoes from below, something shifting in the muck. You freeze, listening. Was it a rat? A discarded scrap breaking loose? Or something worse? Something alive beneath the ice? The imagination runs wild in places like this. You pull your cloak tighter, though it does nothing against the smell or the cold. Oddly enough, one traveller's account described garderobes as refreshing in summer, their drafts a relief from heat. The irony nearly makes you laugh now, teeth chattering. Tonight, the draft is a torture device, gnawing at exposed skin, cutting deeper than steel ever could. You finish at last, rising quickly, legs weak, heart pounding. You fumble with your cloak, desperate to cover yourself again. The cold has invaded every seam, every fold, leaving you numb. You slam the lid of the bench shut. Though the gesture feels pointless, the stink will never stay contained. Your boots slip slightly on the damp brushes scattered across the floor. You steady yourself against the wall, hand pressing into slimy stone. The texture makes you flinch, but you cling anyway, grateful for the support. For a moment, you simply breathe, fighting nausea. The torch flame steadies again, flickering defiantly, as though mocking your ordeal. There's still debate among experts about how often garderobes were cleaned. Some argue once or twice a year when the pits filled. Others suspect they were ignored until unbearable. Tonight, the answer feels obvious. Ignored always, until desperation demanded action, and desperation in a castle never runs out. You stagger out into the corridor again, gasping for fresher air. The difference is immediate. The ordinary cold of the hallway suddenly feels clean, almost sweet. You breathe deeply, grateful, even though your lungs still ache. For a moment you lean against the wall, shivering, drained. And then it strikes you. In this castle, there is no refuge. Not in the chapel, not in the hall, not in the bed, not even in the privy. Each place promises relief, yet delivers new torment. The cold is everywhere, the stink unavoidable, the misery relentless. You press onward, torchlight dancing against the stone. Your body aches, your skin burns, your stomach churns. One day here already feels longer than a year, and the night is not yet over. You press deeper into the castle's belly, torch in hand, the stone passage narrowing around you. The silence here is thick, broken only by the shuffle of your boots and the rasp of your breath. Then, as you turn a corner, the air shifts. A faint draught curls along the corridor, teasing the flame in your hand. The torch sputters, crackles, and for a moment you fear it might die altogether. The light wavers across the walls, throwing shadows that stretch and shrink like living things. One moment a column looms tall, the next it slithers away, leaving you unsure of what's real. You tighten your grip on the torch, knuckles whitening, even though the wood is hot where resin oozes. The corridor smells of smoke, damp plaster, and something sharp like stone newly cut. The taste of it clings to your tongue, acrid and metallic. Household records describe torches as a necessity in medieval corridors. Castle interiors were so dim that even at midday, stone walls swallowed sunlight before it reached inner rooms. Tonight, you see proof. Without the torch, you would be swallowed too. A strange little detail appears in travelers' notes. People often complain that torches smoked more than they shone. You notice it yourself now. The sting in your eyes, the way soot collects in your nose. Each cough echoes down the passage, bouncing back like mockery. Your flame offers guidance, yes, but at the price of irritation, as if even light here must cause suffering. The draught grows stronger. The flame bends sideways, shrinking, its shadows jerking madly along the wall. You pause, heart thumping. What if it goes out? Darkness here would be complete. A blackness so thick your hands would vanish before your eyes. Panic rises in your throat at the thought. Archaeological evidence confirms that castle corridors were designed with intentional turns and blind spots, ideal for defense but treacherous for those wandering at night. As the flame wavers, you feel like prey inside a labyrinth, the walls pressing in, the air turning colder. Each gust threatens to snuff the only protection you have. You shield the torch with your hand, crouching slightly to block the wind. The resin pops, spraying a spark that lands on your sleeve. You slap at it quickly, the smell of scorched wool joining the smoky air. The itch of the fabric worsens, as though it resents the insult of fire. You mutter softly, though no one is there to hear. The shadows play tricks. At one point, you swear you see movement ahead, a figure slipping around a corner, the hem of a cloak vanishing into dark. You hurry forward, but find nothing. Only stone, damp and empty. Your mind whispers, perhaps just smoke and shadow, or perhaps the castle itself watches. There's still debate among historians about how well lit castles were by night. Some argue halls and chambers always kept torches burning. Others insist darkness reigned, with only occasional light for guards. Tonight, the flickering proves how fragile any illumination island. One gust, one mistake, and the world collapses into night. You reach an alcove where a torch bracket hangs empty. The iron is slick with condensation, as though mocking your current flame. You imagine guards moving through here, their own lights failing, leaving them stranded. Fear is not just an enemy at the gates, it lurks in the corridors themselves. Oddly enough, some households preferred rushlights, thin reeds dipped in fat, cheaper than torches but even smokier. You imagine them here, their feeble glow smothered instantly by the draft. The thought is almost funny in its futility. Almost. The corridor bends sharply, and the draft surges. The flame shrinks to a trembling point, sputtering so violently you gasp. Instinct takes over, you hunch low, cup your hand, whisper nonsense as though coaxing a child. For a moment, it works. The flame steadies, flares, throws long shadows across the wall. Relief floods you, warm as any fire. But the reprieve is brief. A fresh gust slams through the passage, so sharp it whistles. The torch nearly dies again, plunging half the corridor into blackness. You freeze, breath shallow, feeling your heart hammer in the dark. This is how men went mad. You realize, not from enemies, not from famine, but from darkness creeping closer, one breath at a time. You press forward, desperate to find a hearth, a chamber, anything. Your boots crunch on frozen rushes scattered even here, and each sound feels amplified by the silence. You hear your own pulse louder than footsteps. The flame burns lower, resin nearly gone, and you know it will not last. Finally, you spot another torch in a wall bracket ahead. Its stub is blackened, long dead, but your hands move quickly. You lean your fading flame against it, coaxing it to life. Smoke belches first, then orange tongues catch, crackling upward. The new torch flares, flooding the corridor with light. Shadows leap back, chased away for now. Relief washes over you so powerfully you laugh, though the sound is strained, half mad. Most historians agree that servants rotated constantly to replace torches, a full-time task in larger castles. But what if someone failed? What if the draft was stronger, the resin wetter, the flame weaker? You've seen tonight how fragile it is, how close you've come to being swallowed whole. The corridor continues onward, the wind still lurking, but your grip is steadier now. You breathe the smoke, endure the sting in your eyes, and press forward. Better a smoky flame than none. Better flickering shadows than absolute dark. And yet, as you walk, you realize the truth. The torch is not your ally. It blinds as much as it guides, throws fearsome shadows, burns your skin, stains your lungs. It is survival. Yes, but survival here is always edged with pain. You carry the light anyway. In this castle, even flawed fire is the difference between walking and being consumed by night. The fresh torch sputters but holds, and with it you descend into the castle's underbelly. A narrow stair curls downward, stone steps slick with moisture. Each footfall echoes, deeper and deeper, until even the sound feels damp. The air thickens, colder than before, carrying a stale heaviness that clings to your throat. If the great hall above was uncomfortable, the dungeon below is something else, entirely a tomb for the living. You push open a heavy door bound with iron. Its hinges groan like an animal in pain, and the noise fades into the silence below. The torchlight reveals a row of cells, their bars glistening with frost. Chains dangle from the walls, their links stiff and rimed white. The floor is uneven, patched with ice that crunches beneath your boots. Breath clouds instantly, yours and others, though theirs emerge in weak, ragged puffs. It's well documented in legal records that castle dungeons were never designed for comfort. They were tools of intimidation, holding pens for the forgotten, sometimes even storage for the inconvenient. Tonight, the cruelty of that purpose presses against you in the freezing dark. A prisoner stirs in the nearest cell. His hair is matted with ice, his skin pale as candle wax. His lips are cracked, trembling, words forming without sound. He extends a hand through the bars, fingers raw, nails dark. The gesture is neither plea nor greeting, it is instinct, a body reaching for any source of warmth, even your smoky torch. Oddly enough, some chronicles describe prisoners burning scraps of straw or gnawed bones smeared with grease, desperate for even a flicker of heat. Here, no such sparks glow. The cells are bare, save for filth frozen to the floor. You move closer, and the smell thickens. Not the stench of waste alone, though that lingers, trapped in the frost. It is the odor of sickness, of wounds unhealed, of breath sour with hunger. Your stomach knots, the air cloying as smoke, but colder. The prisoner's breath condenses on the bars, leaving tiny crystals that glisten in your light. You imagine him inhaling those same crystals again and again, frost becoming part of his lungs. You shiver, realizing how easily you could join him here not through crime, but through misfortune, accusation, or politics. Castles were as much prisons for the innocent as for the guilty. Some scholars argue dungeons were rarely used, more symbolic than functional. Others insist they were busy, crowded, indispensable. Standing here, surrounded by coughs and groans, the latter feels undeniable. Each sound echoes like a warning. Each shadow whispers of suffering. One man lies curled on the floor, his body wrapped in rags. The frost has stiffened them so thoroughly that he seems cocooned, entombed in his own clothing. His chest rises faintly, each breath shallow, rattling. You wonder how many nights he has endured, or how many more he can. A peculiar detail appears in some accounts. Guards themselves feared long duty in the dungeon, complaining of damp that rotted their boots and ate into their bones. You believe it. The cold here isn't just air, it is liquid, seeping through stone, soaking you despite your layers. Your cloak clings to you, heavy with moisture, itching worse with every moment. You kneel briefly, examining the frost along the wall. Your torch melts a droplet, which trickles downward before freezing again in seconds. Time itself feels sluggish here, slowed by the ice, frozen mid-breath. From deeper within comes a moan, low and haunting. It rises, fades, then returns, a rhythm that settles into your bones. You cannot tell if it's one voice or many, blending together into a chorus of despair. The sound unsettles more than silence ever could. There's still disagreement among historians about whether torture chambers were truly common in castles or exaggerated in later tales. Yet as you trace the iron rings embedded in stone, you suspect some truths are colder than legend. Even without fire or whip, the dungeon itself is a torture chamber. Cold is its instrument, time its accomplice. Your torchlight flickers across a bucket in the corner of one cell. It's tipped, its contents frozen into a grotesque sculpture. The shape is unrecognizable, but its presence is enough. You gag slightly, turning away, the taste of bile sharp in your throat. The prisoner nearest you coughs suddenly, spraying flecks of red against the frost. They freeze instantly, tiny rubies on a white canvas. He slumps back, exhausted by the act. You stand motionless, realizing how fragile life is here, how death would come quietly, disguised as sleep. Oddly enough, one record mentions rats sharing the cells, their warmth ironically welcomed by some prisoners. You glance at the corners, half expecting whiskers to twitch. Perhaps even they avoid this depth tonight, unwilling to contest with the frost. You pace slowly down the row, torch raised. Each cell tells the same story. Bodies huddled, breath misting, frost clinging. Each story ends the same way too. There is no escape here, only a slower or faster surrender. Your own skin prickles, your joints ache. The cold here is worse than the tower wind, worse than the icy sheets. Here, it is alive, pressing from all sides, draining heat with every heartbeat. You imagine being left in one of these cells, shackled to the wall, no cloak, no torch. The thought alone is enough to make your knees weaken. You turn at last, retreating toward the stairs. The prisoner's eyes follow, dull yet piercing. They do not beg, they do not need to. Their existence is plea enough. You ascend, your breath ragged, your torch burning low. At the stairs' top, you slam the door shut. The groan of iron fades, replaced by silence once more. Yet the frost has followed you, clinging to your skin, settling into your lungs. The dungeon remains behind, but its chill will not leave you. And as you lean against the wall, trembling, you realize this castle offers no mercy, not even to those already broken. For prisoners, cold is not a punishment. It is the environment itself, relentless, impartial, eternal. You climb back into the upper corridors, desperate for relief, yet the cold clings to you like a second skin. The dungeon's breath lingers in your lungs, its silence still echoing in your ears. A servant motions you toward a quieter chamber, one said to house wisdom, the castle's library or study, where parchments and manuscripts are stored. You follow, hoping for distraction, maybe even comfort in the company of books. The door groans open, and you step inside. At once, a different kind of cold greets you, not howling wind, not dungeon frost, but a crisp dryness that prickles your nose. The air smells of old leather, dust, and faint mold, an archive of centuries. Rows of shelves line the walls, their planks warped by damp, their surfaces speckled with mildew. Scrolls and codices rest precariously, some curled from moisture, others stiff as boards from freezing air. Surviving inventories from medieval castles confirm that libraries were rare luxuries, often tucked into towers or side chambers. They were meant to preserve knowledge, yet ironically their environment destroyed as much as it saved. Tonight you see how. The parchments are brittle, their ink faded, their pages stiff with cold. Touch one, and it might crumble in your hand like autumn leaves. A peculiar note in one scribe's diary laments how ink sometimes froze in winter, quills useless until warmed by a nearby candle. You can almost picture it, monks or clerks blowing on their fingers, shaking numb hands, trying to scratch words onto parchment before frost stopped them. The silence here feels thick with their struggle. You walk along the shelves, torchlight casting jittery glows. Shadows crawl across the spines of volumes, making them look alive. You trail your hand along a row, fingers brushing leather hardened by age. The sensation is rough, almost like bark, and as cold as the stone walls around you. Most historians agree that books were treasured not only for their content but for their symbolic power. To own manuscripts meant prestige, authority, learning. Yet here, huddled in this frozen room, they feel more like relics than tools. What good is wisdom when your fingers tremble too violently to turn a page? You pause at a lectern where a large tome lies open, its pages warped into waves. The ink has bled slightly where damp crept in, blurring letters into smudges. You lean closer, trying to read, but your breath mists onto the parchment. Droplets freeze almost instantly, leaving faint white specks across the margin. You pull back quickly, horrified by your own intrusion. One curious custom, mentioned in scattered accounts, was to dry damp books near hearths, but fire often scorched them, curling parchment into brittle husks. You glance toward the corner, where a brazier sits cold and empty. No one dares risk flame here, not in a room of tinder waiting to ignite. The irony presses on you, wisdom preserved in books, yet safer in darkness than in warmth. The chill deepens as you sit on a stool near the lectern. The wood creaks beneath you, its joints stiff with frost. You rub your hands, then pull your cloak tighter, though the scratch of wool distracts more than it soothes. Your eyes scan the shelves again, catching glimpses of bindings cracked like dry skin. Some scrolls are tied with string that has frozen stiff. You imagine unrolling one, the parchment snapping instead of bending, knowledge lost forever to winter. Academic debate continues about how much these libraries were actually used. Some argue they were symbols, visited rarely. Others suggest scholars worked daily despite the cold. Sitting here now, you can hardly imagine anyone lasting an hour. The ink-stained hands, the blurred eyes, the constant itch of frost, it must have been torment disguised as learning. Oddly enough, one chronicler wrote of monks wearing gloves with fingertips cut off, so they could grip quills while still keeping their hands partially warm. You picture yourself trying the same, your own fingers stiff, trembling as you attempt to trace letters. The torch flickers, and you realize you'd probably spill ink across the page before writing a single word. The silence here is deceptive. It seems peaceful at first, but then the small sounds emerge, the faint drip of condensation falling from the ceiling, the brittle crack of parchment shifting on shelves, the scurry of a mouse weaving through scrolls. You shiver again, realizing that even knowledge is not immune to infestation. Rats and cold alike are enemies of books. You lean back, tilting your head toward the ceiling. Frost crystals cling to the wooden beams, forming delicate lacework. Beautiful, yes, but you know the weight of it will eventually drip, rot, or collapse. Even architecture betrays its treasures. You breathe in deeply, the cold air stinging your lungs. For a moment, you wonder what secrets these volumes hold: recipes for medicine, prayers for salvation, histories of kings long dead. But the knowledge remains locked behind ink and parchment, as inaccessible to you now as warmth itself. And then the draft grows stronger again. Your torch bends, its smoke swirling dangerously close to a row of manuscripts. Panic jolts you upright. The thought of flame catching here, devouring centuries in minutes, is terrifying. You shield the torch quickly, clutching it tighter, your heart pounding. For a moment, you nearly wish it would go out, just to remove the risk. Better darkness than fire in this fragile tomb. You retreat toward the door, breath quickening, cloak scratching against your neck. The books remain behind, silent and cold, their wisdom entombed. You realize with clarity that even here, in the supposed sanctuary of learning, there is no comfort, only chill, only risk, only fragility. And as you step back into the corridor, you can't help but think, in this castle, even knowledge shivers. You follow the corridor's twists until the faint smell of smoke and fat reaches your nose. At first, you welcome it. After the dungeon's rot and the library's dry mildew, the idea of food and fire is almost a relief. You push through a wooden door and step into the kitchens, a place that should be warm, bustling, fragrant. Instead, you find another paradox. Another chamber where comfort promises much and delivers little. The ceiling is dark with soot, beams stained from years of fires that never quite heated the space. A great hearth dominates the far wall, its flames roaring, its smoke funneled upward through a chimney that leaks more than it carries. Sparks snap and drift sideways before dying in mid-air. The warmth of the fire radiates strongly in its immediate circle, but step even a few feet away and the air is as cold as the corridor outside. Chroniclers often praised castle kitchens as the busiest, most alive rooms of winter nights. They were alive, yes, but alive with labour, not warmth. You watch servants rush back and forth, faces red with cold, not from heat. Their breath still fogs in the air despite the flames, proof that the kitchen fights a losing battle. Oddly enough, some accounts mention cooks wearing mittens, even as they turned spits and stirred pots, the wool singed from leaning too close to flames. Tonight, you see why. One man rotates a carcass on the spit, his sleeves smoking slightly as sparks catch the fabric. His hands tremble not just from exertion but from the chill that seeps even here. The smells are overwhelming. Roasting meat mingles with boiling cabbage, with onions, with the sharp tang of smoke. For a moment, your stomach growls, desperate. But then the odours sour, layered with the stench of grease clinging to damp stone, of fish scales scattered on the floor, of unwashed pots stacked in corners. Hunger dulls quickly when every breath is filled with char and rot. Most historians agree kitchens doubled as storage for everything from grain to game. You see the evidence. Barrels crusted with frost, sacks of flour hardened at the edges, herbs strung from beams, their fragrance long stolen by damp. A basket of apples sits nearby, but when you lift one, your fingers sting, it's frozen solid, its skin splitting in white cracks. A peculiar practice sometimes noted was to leave dough near the fire overnight, hoping it would rise. But here, the draught whips past so violently that the air steals more warmth than the hearth gives. A lump of dough sits stiff on the table, cracked, refusing to soften. The irony is cruel. Fire blazes, yet bread refuses to live. The servants themselves are as weary as their tasks. One girl stirs a pot with eyes half closed, her shoulders slumping. Another carries a jug of water, only to find the top layer frozen, forcing her to smash through it with the ladle. A boy sweeps ashes from the hearth, coughing as soot billows into his face. The kitchen is busy, yes, but busy in misery. You step closer to the fire, desperate for relief. For a moment, warmth floods your fingers, prickling painfully as circulation returns. But just as quickly, sweat beads on your skin, only to chill again when you step back. The warmth is fickle, fleeting, impossible to hold. There's still disagreement among scholars about whether castle kitchens provided any comfort to servants outside their duties. Some argue people lingered near the fire for reprieve. Others claim draughts and smoke made them unbearable. Tonight, the truth is clear. The kitchen is both blessing and curse. Too close, and you choke. Too far, and you freeze. The noises are relentless. Knives clatter, spits groan, ladles clang. A dog barks, snapping at scraps, while hens shuffle in a corner cage, feathers ruffled from the cold. Children's cries echo faintly from the servants' quarters nearby. All of it blends into a chaotic hum, a reminder that life in a castle was never quiet, even misery had its soundtrack. Oddly enough, some kitchens doubled as sleeping places for animals in winter, their breath adding warmth. You glance at the corner where a pig roots noisily in straw, its body steaming faintly. It snorts, shakes, then curls down, content. You feel a pang of envy. Perhaps it will sleep warmer than you tonight. Your torch smokes badly here, its flame competing with the hearth. You extinguish it quickly, coughing as soot clogs your throat. Without it, the kitchen glows dimly, lit only by the red blaze of fire and the yellow of tallow candles. Shadows dart across the walls with every movement, twisting servants into giants, pots into hulking shapes. The scene looks more like a battle than a meal in preparation. The cook, a broad man with flour crusted on his tunic, barks orders. His voice is hoarse, his face glistening with sweat near the fire, yet his hands are cracked and red with cold. He slams a pot onto the table, mutters curses, and stirs with a heavy spoon. You realize suddenly that this room sustains the entire castle, yet the hands that feed others go hungry themselves, and the bodies that labor by fire are never truly warm. You sit briefly on a stool watching, The air presses against you, heavy with smoke. Your eyes sting. Your throat burns. For a moment, you think you'd rather face the tower wind again than this choking haze. But then a gust from the corridor sweeps in, chilling you instantly, and you laugh weakly at your own foolishness. Choice here is only between kinds of suffering. Interpretations vary about whether nobles ever entered these kitchens. Some sources insist they avoided them, preferring to keep labor invisible. Others suggest lords visited on occasion, sampling dishes or asserting dominance. Tonight, no noble stirs here. Only servants, sweating and freezing in equal measure, their lives as brittle as the frozen apples. You rise, cloak heavy with new smells, smoke, grease, sweat, and ash. The kitchen has given you no nourishment, only another layer of discomfort. You step back into the corridor, the air outside suddenly tasting sweet despite its chill. Behind you, the clatter continues, endless, thankless. And you realize once more, even where fire burns brightest, warmth is fleeting. In this castle, every promise of food, of rest, of comfort crumbles like dough that refuses to rise. The kitchen smoke still clings to your cloak as you drift once more through narrow passages, searching for air that doesn't sting your lungs. The servant guiding you pauses before a heavy wooden door banded with iron. He pushes it open, and the hinges creak, as though reluctant to reveal what waits. A chill surges out, sharper than the corridors. You step inside and find yourself in another sacred space smaller than the grand chapel you left earlier, but stranger. This is the side chapel, the crypt-like chamber where bones are stored, prayers whispered, and mortality pressed close. The first thing you notice is the silence. Unlike the earlier chapel with its chanting voices, here no sound stirs except your own breath. Candles gutter faintly in niches carved into the wall, their flames struggling against draughts that creep between stones. Their dim glow reveals shelves of skulls, neatly arranged, their hollow sockets watching from the shadows. Some are dust-coated, others gleam faintly where wax dripped across them. Chroniclers of the period sometimes mentioned such chapels of bones, spaces meant to remind the living of death's certainty. Tonight, you need no reminder. The cold itself already whispers mortality into your marrow. You step carefully down the stone floor, worn smooth by centuries of feet. Your boots scrape lightly, the sound far too loud in such a room. You lower your torch, and shadows stretch grotesquely across the walls. Skulls multiplied into grinning giants. Your skin prickles, not from superstition but from the way the air itself seems heavier here, damp and cold, like a cellar dug too deep. One curious tidbit survives in pilgrim diaries. Some worshippers touched skulls as a sign of humility, pressing lips to bone in reverence. You imagine doing the same tonight and shudder. The bone would be ice cold, stiff with centuries of frost, a kiss from death itself. You step back instinctively, keeping your distance. The smell here is subtler than the moat or the kitchen, yet still distinct. Earth, wax, and a faint mustiness of decay that clings no matter how many candles burn. You inhale cautiously, but the odor settles in your nostrils, cloying. It is not foul, exactly, but it reminds you of cellars left unopened too long, of pages in books gone mouldy, of clothing damp for months. Most historians agree that such chapels were meant to console that by confronting bones, worshippers grew closer to God. Yet sitting on the cold bench now, with frost creeping up the walls, you feel only distance. These bones do not comfort. They accuse. They say, "You too will lie still, perhaps sooner than you think, if you remain in this castle another night." You glance at one skull in particular, cracked along the brow. The break glitters faintly with frost, the split line filled with white crystals. You imagine the person this once was a guard, a servant, maybe even a noble. Cold has erased those distinctions. Now all are equal, reduced to silence, frozen forever. There's still debate among scholars whether chapels like this doubled as storage when burial space ran short, or whether they were deliberate memento mori. But debate doesn't matter tonight. What matters is the draft slipping down your collar, colder than any you've felt yet, carrying the faint rattle of something shifting in the dark. You hold your torch higher, eyes darting. For a moment, you think you see movement shadows twitching among the skulls. Perhaps rats again, perhaps only your imagination. Still, the thought unsettles. Even here, where death reigns, life persists in scurrying claws. Oddly enough, one monk's account mentions frost forming on altar chalices in winter, so that lips stuck if pressed against the rim. You look toward the altar here, and sure enough, a goblet rests upon it, rim gleaming white. The idea of a prayer ending with skin torn from flesh is enough to send another shiver down your back. You kneel briefly, less from faith than from fatigue. The stone bites into your knees, hard and merciless. You whisper a wordless plea, perhaps for warmth, perhaps for escape, perhaps only for endurance. The silence swallows it whole. No answer comes. Only your own breath fogging before you, mingling with the mist of centuries. The candle beside you sputters, nearly dying. You watch the flame flicker, its light shrinking until only ember glows. For an instant, the chapel plunges toward blackness. Your heart leaps. But then the wick catches again, weakly, throwing its tiny defiance back into the cold. Interpretations vary as to whether people truly found comfort here or merely tolerated such chapels as tradition. Tonight, you know which answer your body gives. No comfort. Only chill, only dread, only another reminder that in this castle, every space, holy or profane, belongs to winter first. You rise slowly, joints stiff, cloak scratching against your neck. The skulls watch silently as you retreat, your torch trailing smoke. You back toward the door, unwilling to turn your back on the rows of bone. Only once the heavy wood closes do you breathe more freely. Outside, the corridor seems almost kind by comparison, though its draught nips your skin. You walk on, heart pounding still, the image of frost-kissed skulls burned into your mind, and you realize that here, even faith carries no warmth. The dead are no more comfortable than the living. In this castle, the chapel of bones whispers the same lesson as the dungeon, the kitchen, the hall. No matter where you go, the cold will follow. You step back into the main corridor, torch sputtering, and follow the sound of echoes to the largest room of all, the great hall. By day, it is a stage for authority. Proclamations issued, justice handed down, meals shared under the watchful eyes of lords. By night, it is something else entirely, a cavern of stone, where drafts prowl like restless wolves. The door opens with a groan, and the size of the chamber swallows you. The ceiling vaults high overhead, beams lost in shadow. The rushes underfoot crackle faintly, stiff with frost. Your torch throws its glow forward, but the space beyond remains half hidden, stretching into a haze of darkness. It's not absence of light alone, it's the sheer size of the cold pressing down on every corner. Most historians agree that great halls were rarely heated effectively. A hearth or two might roar at one end, but the warmth never reached far. You see proof now. The embers in a massive fireplace glow red, yet a dozen paces away your breath already mists. The hall is two climates at once: fire, lit summer by the hearth, bitter winter everywhere else. One curious tidbit from travellers mentions guests jockeying for places near the flames, leaving distant benches to the unlucky. Tonight, the benches along the walls sit empty, cloaked in frost, while near the hearth a few servants huddle like moths. They hold their hands out, turning them constantly, as if trying to memorize warmth before it flees again. You walk toward the center, your cloak dragging along the rushes. The air feels restless, as though invisible hands keep stirring it. A sudden gust whistles through the hall, rattling the iron chandelier above. Wax drips down like frozen tears, some drops hardening mid-drip, grotesque icicles hanging from the candles. You glance up uneasily, wondering if one might snap loose and fall. Chroniclers often described these halls as symbols of power, their tapestries and banners declaring wealth. You notice the tapestries now, but not with awe. They hang stiff against the walls, colours dulled, threads eaten by damp. Frost has crept along their edges, tiny white lacework climbing scenes of battles and saints. The fabric, meant to block drafts, has failed entirely. Oddly enough, some accounts note people bringing dogs into the hall at night, letting them lie along the benches for warmth. Tonight, a hound sprawls near the hearth, belly pressed to the rushes, snoring faintly. You envy him again, just as you did in the supper room. At least he knows where to settle. You take a seat on a bench near the centre, testing how long you can endure. The wood is icy beneath you, seeping straight through cloak and tunic. Your body stiffens instantly, shoulders hunching, teeth clenching. The torch helps little here, its circle of light too small for such vastness. You feel absurdly small, dwarfed by stone and shadow. Some scholars still debate whether people truly used these halls at night or retreated elsewhere. Letters describe servants stoking fires until late, but others suggest the spaces were abandoned after feasts. Sitting here now, you can see why. The emptiness is overwhelming, the cold oppressive, the scale too grand for human comfort. The soundscape is haunting. Every drip of condensation echoes like a drum. The scuttle of a mouse seems magnified into thunder. When a draught sighs through the rafters, it sounds like voices murmuring overhead. You rub your arms and shiver, the itch of wool sharper in this silence. A candle guttering on a side table catches your eye. Its wax has pooled and hardened, its wick collapsed into a stub. You think of the servants forced to relight every candle each evening, trudging from one end of this cavern to the other, their breath freezing as they worked. How many times must they have cursed this endless cold? Oddly enough, a few chroniclers wrote of nobles boasting about their hall's size, bragging that smoke disappeared into rafters high above. Yet tonight, that boast feels like folly. The smoke drifts upward, yes, but warmth goes with it, vanishing into the void, leaving the people below to freeze. Grandeur here is measured not in comfort, but in endurance. You shift again, the bench groaning faintly. Your legs ache from stillness, your fingers throb from holding the torch too long. You want to move closer to the hearth, but the distance feels immense. Your limbs heavy. The fire's glow taunts you across the hall. Orange flickers promising relief but never reaching. There's still disagreement among historians about whether servants slept in the hall itself, bedding down after the lords retired. Some argue yes, pointing to records of pallets spread along the rushes. Others doubt it, citing drafts too severe. Tonight, you know you would not risk it. The thought of lying here, in such vastness, with shadows and whispers and icy gusts, feels unbearable. Better the cramped straw nests of the servants' quarters than this empty, frozen stage. Another gust sweeps through, extinguishing one of the few candles. Darkness spreads farther. Your torch flares in protest, then steadies, but the circle of safety feels smaller. You rise, legs trembling, cloak dragging heavily. The hall stretches around you, indifferent, colossal, endless. You walk quickly toward the door, boots crunching, torch sputtering. Behind you, the hearth glows faintly, the only heartbeat of warmth in the chamber. The rest remains cold stone, frozen tapestries, empty benches. You glance back once before leaving, and the sight chills you deeper than any wind. A room built for grandeur, reduced to an echo chamber of drafts. And as you step into the corridor again, you realize power built this hall, but power cannot banish cold. In this castle, even greatness shivers. You climb a short flight of steps that leads to a gallery lined with narrow windows. At first you think the view might offer relief, a glimpse of moonlight, a reminder of the world beyond these stone walls. But when you lean close, you see only frost. The glass, such as it is cloudy, uneven, and covered with a delicate white bloom. The outside world has been painted over by winter itself. The window is small, barely wider than your hand. You exhale against it, and your breath momentarily clears a patch, revealing a sliver of night. Beyond lies the courtyard, pale and silent, snow blanketing everything. The world looks lifeless, drained of colour. You rub the glass with your sleeve, but frost reforms almost instantly, spreading tendrils like veins across the surface. Medieval records confirm that windows in castles were rarely generous. They were narrow for defence, covered with horn, oiled cloth, or crude glass. Tonight you see why. The panes block little cold, allowing draughts to snake freely into the gallery. Each gust brushes against your face like a wet cloth wrung in ice. One curious account from an English manor describes people stuffing wool or moss into window cracks, hoping to keep wind at bay. You glance at the seams here and notice rags wedged into corners, stiff with frost, their fibres brittle. Clearly, someone has tried, but the effort is laughable. The wind whistles anyway, high and thin, like a distant flute out of tune. You rest your palm against the sill. It is stone, and the contact burns. Your skin sticks slightly before you pull away. The sensation lingers, a dull ache spreading up your wrist. You flex your fingers, wondering how many generations have done the same, testing the cold only to regret it instantly. Most historians agree that window seats, those charming alcoves you sometimes see in illustrations, were less cozy in reality. Tonight, you test the truth. You lower yourself onto the ledge, cloak tucked tight, and the stone bites into you with merciless chill. Your body stiffens, the scratch of wool intensified by contact with frozen rock. You shift, but every position is worse than the last. Comfort does not exist here, only different degrees of pain. Oddly enough, some chronicles describe children drawing patterns in frost with their fingers, turning misery into play. You trace a line absently now, watching the frost crumble, reform, spread again. But where a child might giggle, you only sigh. The cold steals joy as quickly as it steals heat. You peer again through the tiny clearing you made. A guard trudges across the courtyard below, his breath a steady plume. He stamps his feet, pulls his cloak tight, then vanishes into shadow. You realize he'll repeat that circuit all night, round and round. His only company the wind. The thought makes your own shelter feel thinner, less secure. If even walls cannot keep cold out, what hope does a patrolling guard have? Scholars remain divided on whether glass improved comfort significantly. Some argue even poor panes helped. Others say they made little difference, allowing draughts while dulling light. Your body votes with the latter. The gallery feels like a wind tunnel, the frost on the glass proof that barriers are illusions. You lean your forehead to the pane, hoping for steadiness, but the cold strikes instantly, stabbing through your skull. You jerk back with a hiss, rubbing your skin. A faint white mark remains, as if winter has branded you. You laugh bitterly at the absurdity scarred by a window. The gallery stretches long, lined with similar slits. You pace slowly, torch in hand, watching frost glitter in each one. Some panes are cracked, edges rimed with ice. A few are patched with cloth, stiff as boards. Everywhere, draughts sing softly, blending into a mournful chorus. You pull your cloak tighter, though the wool's itch feels like another insult. A peculiar note in estate accounts mentions servants tasked with scraping frost from panes at dawn, clearing light for the day. You imagine the work: bare fingers on frozen glass, nails cracking, skin splitting. And yet, by nightfall, frost would return, undoing all their labour. The castle, like the season, erases effort without pity. You stop at the last window, the largest of the row. The frost is thickest here, opaque, glowing faintly in torchlight. For a moment, you imagine it is a wall of crystal, beautiful, majestic. But then you place your hand against it again, and reality answers. It is not crystal, not treasure, only another layer of suffering. Interpretations vary as to whether lords appreciated these windows as symbols of wealth, showing off their crude glass, or cursed them for letting in cold. Standing here, you feel the contradiction firsthand. beauty and misery fused into one. Your torch flares suddenly as a draft surges, flame bending sideways, shadows leaping. The frost glitters, almost mocking, as though laughing at your struggle. You pull away quickly, moving back toward the door, cloak heavy, skin raw. As you leave the gallery, one thought lingers. In this castle, even the promise of a view of looking outward, of feeling less trapped, is stolen. Frost blinds as surely as stone, and the world beyond might as well not exist at all. You descend a side stair once more, torch raised against the shadows. The smell of smoke and meat clings faintly in the air, guiding you back toward the hall where the feast had taken place earlier. But the laughter is gone now, the music silenced, the nobles retreated to their chambers. Only scraps remain. The great tables, once groaning with food, now sag beneath platters of leftovers, banquets frozen in place. The first thing you notice is the silence. Without voices to mask it, the sound of dripping fat echoes eerily. A roast bird sits stiff on a silver tray, its skin dull, its wings rigid. Congealed grease has hardened into pale crusts, gleaming faintly in your torchlight. You prod it with a fingertip, and it resists, rubbery and cold. Medieval chroniclers often praised the extravagance of such feasts. Swan roasted with feathers reattached, pies filled with live birds, towers of sugared almonds. But they rarely admitted the truth of what came after that, all of it cooled into inedible lumps within hours, spoiled faster than it was eaten. Tonight, the evidence spreads before you in grim silence. A trencher of bread lies abandoned, its crust cracked, interior solid as stone. One curious practice was to use stale bread trenchers as dog food the next day. You can see why. You strike the loaf against the table, and it makes a sound more like wood than food. You lift a pitcher of wine. Its liquid moves sluggishly, thickened by cold. When you pour a little into a goblet, ice crystals swirl across the surface. You take a cautious sip, but it tastes sharp, sour, more vinegar than drink. Your lips sting where the rim touches, cold enough to burn. Oddly enough, servants often ate these scraps the next day, grateful despite the state of them. You imagine carrying one of these platters back to the servants' quarters, watching children gnaw stiff meat with blue lips. Survival makes delicacy of refuse. The hall itself feels emptier now, its vastness magnified by the absence of sound. Drafts sweep through, stirring wax stubs into guttering flames. Shadows leap across the tapestries, making frozen food seem to twitch, as if mocking you with phantom movement. A platter of fish sits near the end of the table. Its skin glistens, eyes clouded, scales stiff. The smell rises faintly sharp, metallic, unpleasant. You gag slightly, turning away. Somewhere in the dark, a rat squeaks, emboldened by silence. You hear the scurry of claws across wood, the faint thump of a platter shifting. The feast now belongs to vermin. Most historians agree that winter feasts were as much about display as nourishment. Nobles boasted of their wealth by serving more than anyone could eat. Yet here you see the cruel irony. Food wasted while servants starve in damp straw. Children cough in thin rags. Abundance and hunger coexist, separated only by rank. One strange anecdote survives. Nobles sometimes ordered dishes paraded through halls uneaten, merely to impress guests. You look at a pie untouched, its crust hardened into a pale slab. Perhaps no one wanted it, perhaps no one dared, perhaps it was meant only to be seen. Now it sits, forgotten, freezing into rock. You sit briefly on a bench, torchlight flickering across the wreckage. The air smells of stale grease and smoke, cloying and heavy. Hunger tugs at you, but nothing here tempts. The cold has conquered every dish. Even sugar loaves glisten with frost hard enough to break teeth. Servants enter quietly, carrying baskets. They scrape plates into piles, dump bones onto rushes for dogs. Their faces are blank, their movements mechanical. One glances at you but does not speak. To them, this is routine. Every feast ends in frost. Every banquet leaves scraps more corpse than meal. Scholars still debate whether medieval diets in castles were truly rich, or merely appeared so on rare occasions. Standing here now, surrounded by food already ruined, you see the hollowness of the spectacle. What glitters in candlelight dies in shadow. What seemed like excess a few hours ago is now rot. You rise and walk the length of the hall. Each step echoes. Your torchlight catches gnawed bones, goblets tipped on their sides, wax hardened into grotesque puddles. The place looks less like a celebration and more like the aftermath of battle. Cold is the victor, feasting on everything left behind. Oddly enough, some reports describe dogs fighting over scraps in the night, their growls echoing until dawn. You hear it now, faint snarls from under a table, shadows shifting as hounds scavenge. They eat noisily, crunching frozen bones, tails thumping against wood. For them, this is fortune. For you, it is one more reminder of deprivation disguised as plenty. You make your way to the hearth at the far end. Its embers glow faintly, still warm if you hold your hands directly above. But the fire is nearly gone, its strength spent. Ash drifts upward, light as dust. You think briefly of stoking it, reviving the blaze. Yet no fuel waits, no logs stacked nearby. Perhaps tomorrow's servants will bring more. Tonight, only memory remains. Interpretations vary on whether nobles lingered long after feasts, drinking and boasting into night. Perhaps they did, when wine flowed and fires roared. But tonight, the emptiness proves another truth. Warmth and noise vanish quickly, leaving stone behind. You step back toward the door, glancing once more at the frozen banquet. The platters gleam faintly, grotesque sculptures of what was once nourishment. The air is colder here than when you entered, or perhaps it's simply that hope has drained. And you realize, in this castle even feasts are fragile. Abundance is temporary, comfort fleeting, and joy swallowed whole by frost. The banquet hall fades behind you, its frozen scraps left for vermin and dogs. You follow the servant's lantern through another warren of corridors, until you're shown back toward the chambers where others lie restless. It is deep into the night now, yet rest proves elusive in a castle like this. The air is thick with coughing. It echoes through doorways, threads down stairwells, rises from straw pallets. One cough is sharp and dry, another wet and rattling. Together, they form a grim chorus, punctuating the silence like tolling bells. You pause, listening, and realize how constant it is. Breathing in this fortress is never quiet, never easy. Medical records from the period show that colds, fevers, and lung ailments were constant companions of winter. The damp stone walls, the smoky air, the drafts from broken shutters all conspired to weaken bodies already half-starved. Tonight, you witness it firsthand. One peculiar note from a physician's diary mentions winter coughs so fierce that people vomited or cracked ribs. You walk past a chamber and hear just such a fit, a violent spasm that shakes the doorframe. A servant rushes in with a bucket, but the sound continues, ragged and relentless. You move on quickly, stomach tight, ears ringing with sympathy. You peek into another chamber. Families huddle together on straw beds, their bodies pressed so close they seem fused. Children shift uneasily, faces pale, lips blue. A boy wheezes, each breath whistling, his mother rubbing his back in weary circles. She whispers soothing words, but her own cough betrays her fatigue. The room smells of sweat, mildew, and sour breath. You retreat, overwhelmed. Oddly enough, some chronicles describe remedies for such nights. Possets of hot milk and ale, honey stirred with herbs, even roasted onions pressed to the chest. You doubt many here can afford such luxuries. Instead, they clutch thin blankets tighter, trusting body heat and prayer more than medicine. You pass another chamber, this one for soldiers. The men lie wrapped in cloaks, armor stacked in heaps nearby. Their coughs are deeper, harsher, echoing like drums in the stone space. One man mutters in his sleep, tossing, his breath wheezing out in clouds. Another wakes abruptly, hacking, then spits into the rushes. The sound is wet, the smell metallic. He lies back down without a word. Most historians agree that sleep in castles was fragmented, punctured by cold, by noise, by discomfort. Tonight, you see why. Every room is alive with restless movement, every corridor carrying echoes of illness. True sleep seems a luxury few can afford. You reach a narrow stairwell, hoping for quiet above. But the higher chambers are no better. Behind one door, you hear a child crying weakly, followed by the hoarse lull of a nurse. Behind another, the muffled rasp of an old man gasping for air. The sounds weave together into a tapestry of unease, a reminder that night is never gentle here. Oddly enough, some letters survive from nobles complaining of their own coughs, despite heavy curtains and feather beds. One lady writes of waking with ice on her pillow, her breath frozen into crystals. You think of her as you walk, your own nose tingling, throat raw from smoke. Even wealth cannot banish winter's reach. The draft intensifies as you pass a window slit. The flame of your torch bends, nearly extinguished. For a moment, you stand in near darkness, listening to the chorus of coughs, the sigh of wind, the rattle of wood. The sensation is overwhelming, as if the castle itself breathes sickness into every corridor. You descend again, searching for any chamber that feels calmer. But each one you pass offers the same. Bodies curled tightly, blankets damp, lungs straining. You notice the smell everywhere now, a blend of smoke, damp wool, and phlegm. It settles into your cloak, into your skin. You cough yourself, startled by how quickly the air has claimed you. There's still disagreement among historians about how common death was in such winters. Some suggest most survived with misery. Others argue mortality soared, especially among children. Tonight, the line between survival and loss feels razor thin. Each rasping breath could be the last, and no one here would be surprised. You lean briefly against a wall, exhausted. The stone is cold, but you're too weary to care. Your own eyes burn with fatigue, yet sleep feels impossible. Every sound jars you awake again. Every draught slices through your cloak. You wonder bitterly how anyone managed to live long in such conditions. One servant passes, carrying a bucket of water. His face is pale, his lips cracked. He pauses to cough violently, nearly dropping the bucket, then straightens and trudges on. Duty continues, even in sickness. You watch him vanish, his steps unsteady, and realize again that life here is not about thriving but enduring. Oddly enough, some scholars suggest people became accustomed to the noise of coughing, treating it like background sound. Perhaps true, but tonight, your ears cannot adjust. Each fit pierces you, reminding you of frailty, of bodies betraying themselves in the dark. You push onward, torch flickering low. Your legs ache, your chest feels tight, and still the coughs echo. The castle is alive, yes, but alive with misery, a hive buzzing not with industry, but with sickness. At last, you reach an alcove and sink onto a bench. The wood is hard, the air bitter, but at least here you are alone. For a moment, silence surrounds you until another cough rises from the hall below, echoing like a bell tolling through the night. You sigh, close your eyes, and accept it. In this castle, nights are not for sleeping. They are for coughing, for shivering, for waiting until dawn. The night drags on, each cough echoing like a hammer strike in your skull. When at last the blackness of the sky begins to pale toward grey, you expect relief. Morning must surely bring warmth, or at least a reprieve from the suffocating hours of darkness. But as the first light slips through the cracks of shutters and windows, you realize how wrong that expectation island. Dawn in a medieval castle does not mean comfort. It only means another round of endurance. The corridors are awake with movement. Servants shuffle stiffly, carrying buckets of icy water fetched from wells. Their faces are pale, their breaths clouds in the dim corridors. You pass one girl who has spilled half her bucket, the water freezing instantly on the stone floor into a slick hazard. She kneels, trying to scrape it away with bare hands already raw with red cracks. The sight tells you clearly, day has changed nothing. Records from the time often describe mornings as the hardest part of winter days. When fires had died and bodies woke stiff and shivering, you see proof in every corner. Nobles drag themselves from canopied beds, complaining bitterly as servants help them dress. Their garments, stored overnight, are as cold as armor. A boy holds out his master's boots. Frost clings inside them, biting at the noble's toes as he slips them on. He winces, curses, but wears them anyway. One curious custom noted in chronicles was warming clothing by the fire before dressing. But the castle has too few hearths, too many bodies. Servants prioritize cloaks for the lord and lady, leaving others to suffer. You yourself shiver as your cloak stiffens again, sweat from the night now frozen into damp patches. You step into a chamber where a fire is being coaxed to life. Two boys kneel, blowing onto embers, their cheeks hollow, their lips cracked. Sparks rise weakly, refusing to catch on damp logs. The boys cough, eyes watering, but they persist. At last the flames flare, sputtering smoke into the room. The nobles gathered nearby cheer faintly, hands outstretched. Yet the warmth reaches only a narrow circle, while the rest of the chamber remains a cavern of frost. Most historians agree that mornings in castles were spent rekindling fires, sweeping rushes, and breaking ice on water jugs. You witness it all. A servant hacks at a bucket, splinters of ice flying. Another shakes a jug, the frozen block rattling inside. A woman stirs porridge over a flame, the oats clumping heavily, steam mingling with her visible breath. Breakfast here is not luxury, it is survival food, heavy and bland, meant only to keep the body going. Oddly enough, some letters mention nobles rising late in winter, unwilling to face the cold. You can understand. Even now, lords linger in chambers, barking orders from behind curtains, reluctant to expose themselves to the morning draught. Servants scurry in and out, arms loaded with cloaks, boots, and bowls of gruel. The castle hums with activity, but little joy. You step outside into the courtyard, hoping dawn might bring light at least. The sky has indeed brightened, but the sun is pale, a faint smear through thick grey clouds. Its light gives no warmth, only reveals more clearly how the snow crusts every surface. Footprints from the night have frozen solid, sharp ridges that trip your boots. Smoke drifts from chimneys, thin and reluctant. The air is sharper than ever, stinging your lungs with every breath. Chroniclers sometimes wrote of water freezing inside jugs, even after being set by the hearth. You test it now. A trough stands in the yard, filled yesterday. The surface is thick ice, so clear you can see straw trapped inside. You strike it with your fist, and pain shoots up your arm. The ice doesn't even crack. A guard trudges by, his spear slung over one shoulder. He yawns, eyes bleary, nose red. He stamps his feet hard, trying to shake blood into them. Another follows, cloak stiff with frost, beard crusted white. They glance at you but say nothing. Their silence speaks loudly. Morning has not spared them either. There's still debate among scholars whether mornings were truly colder, or if people simply felt them more keenly after restless nights. But as you rub your hands together, breath misting thickly, your own body answers. Morning is worse. The night's small scraps of warmth, body heat, dying embers, damp blankets have all vanished. Dawn brings exposure, and exposure brings pain. Oddly enough, one monk's record describes frost forming on ink in the scriptorium, forcing them to delay work until midday. You think of that as you pass a doorway where a clerk sits hunched, quill hovering. His inkpot is solid, his parchment curling in damp. He shakes his head, muttering, then blows onto his fingers before trying again. His breath fogs the page, leaving tiny crystals where it lands. The futility makes you ache. You walk past the stables, where horses stamp their hooves, steam rising from their nostrils. They look as miserable as the men, their flanks crusted with frost where sweat froze overnight. A boy shovels dung, his movements sluggish, each exhale a cloud. Even beasts of burden suffer, their strength dimmed by winter's grip. The smell of porridge wafts faintly from the kitchens. You follow, hoping for warmth. A servant ladles a lump into a wooden bowl, thrusts it into your hands. You lift it eagerly, but the gruel is lukewarm at best, its surface already forming a thin skin. You sip anyway. It tastes of water and ash, with a faint sweetness of barley. It fills your stomach, yes, but does nothing to warm your bones. Interpretations vary about how people perceive dawn in castles. Some saw it as hopeful, others as dreaded. Standing here, shivering with porridge in hand, you know where you stand. Dawn offers no mercy, only another chance to endure. You return to the courtyard. The nobles are finally emerging, cloaks heavy, boots stiff. They raise their chins, pretending dignity, but their faces betray them: red noses, pale lips, hands trembling in gloves. They mutter to each other, their voices low, their eyes tired. You almost laugh, seeing that wealth offers no immunity. In this castle, even lords greet morning with misery. You lean against the wall, closing your eyes briefly. The stone burns your back with cold, but you're too weary to care. The day has only begun, yet it feels already endless. The coughs continue in the background. The dogs snarl over frozen scraps. The servants shuffle past with buckets. And you realize with crushing clarity, night is cruel, but dawn is no salvation. In this medieval castle, every hour is simply another verse in the same relentless hymn of cold. Morning trudges forward, grey and unforgiving. You follow the sound of clattering from a workroom tucked against the inner wall, where servants and craftsmen keep the tools of daily life. At first you imagine this space might offer the simple comfort of order racks of implements, shelves of supplies, the reassuring signs of labor. But when you step inside, you find yet another betrayal. The air is sharp, filled with the metallic tang of cold iron. Rows of hammers, chisels, knives, and farming tools line the walls, their surfaces rimmed with frost. Handles are stiff, wood swollen from damp, iron brittle to the touch. You lift a hammer experimentally, and the chill burns your palm. Within seconds, your skin sticks to the frozen metal. You jerk your hand away, shaking fingers that now tingle painfully. Chroniclers of the time often mentioned the frustration of winter labor. Tools broke, wood split, metal cracked. Survival was not just about food or warmth, but about keeping the implements of life functional in a climate bent on destroying them. Tonight, you witness that truth. A castle may stand, but its very tools shiver useless. One peculiar account describes blacksmiths forced to work with fires that refuse to hold heat, their bellows stiff, their hammers cracking at the head. You hear it now, a dull clang, as a boy strikes iron on an anvil. The sound is weak, half-hearted. The iron itself does not glow, only smoulders. The boy coughs, his breath fogging, then strikes again, the hammer slipping in his frozen grip. Sparks flare briefly before fading, the light swallowed by damp air. You glance at a barrel of nails. Their heads glisten with frost, edges sharp, points dulled by rust. You pick one up, but it slips instantly from your stiff fingers. It falls with a faint ring, lost among dozens scattered on the floor. You crouch to retrieve it, knees aching from the stone. The cold bites into your skin, numbing even before you rise. Oddly enough, some records note servants warming tools in fire before use, holding them in glowing embers until metal softened. But such tricks brought risk. Tools warped, handles scorched, accidents multiplied. You watch as one man places a spade too close to the hearth, the wood blackening, the smell of smoke rising. He curses softly, pulls it back, but the damage is done. The handle is weaker, the blade still too cold to bite earth. Most historians agree that castles in winter functioned at half capacity. Work slowed, tasks piled, repairs went undone. You see it in the walls here, gaps stuffed with rags, doors swollen against frames, hinges stiff with rust. Tools meant to mend these things lie useless, frozen stiff on their racks. A saw leans in the corner, teeth gleaming faintly. You run your hand along it, but the edge is dull, eaten by frost and age. You imagine trying to cut firewood with it, the teeth slipping, the handle biting your palm with cold. Even gathering fuel for survival becomes torment when the very tool betrays you. Oddly enough, some chronicles describe servants urinating on locks to thaw them, a crude but effective solution. You glance at a chest in the corner, its iron padlock stiff with frost, and almost laugh bitterly. Desperation forces strange choices, and here, dignity freezes as easily as water. A carpenter nearby struggles with a plane, pushing it across a warped plank. The wood resists, fibers stiff, shavings curling sluggishly. He mutters under his breath, sweat freezing on his brow. Each stroke is harder than the last, his breath coming ragged. The tool scrapes, screeches, then sticks entirely. He slams it down in frustration, and for a moment silence fills the room. There's still debate among historians about how much winter halted castle work altogether. Some argue life slowed to a crawl, others that necessity forced constant motion. Standing here, you feel both truths. The tools resist, yet people persist, not because they want to, but because they must. You walk past a rack of scythes, their blades rimed with white. They look more like relics than weapons, their curves stiff, their edges dull. Once, they might have harvested fields. Now they gather frost. A shovel rests nearby, its scoop crusted with ice. You lift it, and flakes fall to the floor like brittle snow. The weight feels heavier than it should, burdened not only with ice but with futility. Oddly enough, some artisans wrap their hands in scraps of fur to grip frozen handles. You look at your own hands, reddened and raw, and envy that ingenuity. But fur is scarce, reserved for nobles. Here, workers make do with stiff wool, its itch no match for frost. The air grows smokier as a forge sputters. A blacksmith pumps the bellows, but the flames barely respond. The iron he holds glows faintly, nothing more. He curses, slams it back on the anvil. The sound dull, lifeless. You realize that even fire cannot conquer winter fully. Even the forge, symbol of strength, bends beneath frost's weight. Interpretations vary on whether medieval winters truly paralyzed daily life, or if chroniclers exaggerated. But tonight, surrounded by useless tools and weary men, you know the answer your body gives. Paralyzed or not, suffering was constant, and the struggle to keep tools functional was as draining as keeping people alive. You move toward the door, torch raised. The room behind you hums with clanging, coughing, muttered curses. The tools hang stiff on their racks, glittering faintly in torchlight, like frozen relics of a forgotten age. You step back into the corridor, cloak heavy, breath shallow, and you realize with bone-deep certainty, in this castle, even the means of survival betray you. Tools meant to serve instead punish, frozen useless in winter's grip. Daylight should bring relief. You expect the grey sky, however bleak, to lift the weight of night. But when you step into the courtyard again, you find the day as merciless as the night before, only longer. The sun, a pale smudge behind heavy clouds, gives no warmth. Its light is thin, like watered wine, barely enough to brighten the snow-crusted ground. Shadows do not fall sharply here. Everything is washed in the same dull grey. You pull your cloak tight, though the wool itches, offering little more than irritation. Around you the castle stirs sluggishly to life. Guards pace along the walls, their breath rising like smoke. Servants scurry with buckets and baskets, heads bowed against the wind. The sound of coughing still echoes from every corner, blending with the scrape of boots on stone. Contemporary chronicles often noted that medieval winters were not just cold but colourless. Fields lay barren, trees skeletal, skies perpetually heavy. You see that truth now. The world looks drained, as though someone has wrung out every hue and left only grey and white. One peculiar description in a monk's journal compares such daylight to living in a painting unfinished, where God forgot his brush. You understand his meaning. The courtyard feels like a sketch, half-formed, drained of vitality. Even banners that once gleamed with dye now hang limp and faded, their reds dulled to rust, their blues to ash. You wander along the wall, boots crunching on patches of ice. The moat below remains frozen, its surface dull, streaked with yellow and grey. The smell rises faintly even now, carried by shifting drafts. You turn away quickly, though the stink follows in memory. Most historians agree that daylight hours in winter were short, limiting work. Yet here, even in full day, little is accomplished. Tools break, fires die, hands stiffen. You watch as a servant tries to split wood in the yard, his axe bouncing off the log. He curses, tries again, only to have the blade slip, nearly striking his own boot. He drops the handle, clutching stiff fingers, breath ragged. The log remains whole, mocking his effort. Oddly enough, some records note that even nobles found daylight dreary, retreating to chambers early. But chambers are no refuge, only different prisons of stone and frost. You think of the frozen beds, the shivering servants, the restless coughing. There is no sanctuary here, only rotation between miseries. The sky grows darker, though it is barely midday. Clouds gather, heavy and low, blotting out what little light remained. Snow begins to fall slow at first, then faster, flakes swirling across the courtyard. They sting your face, melt briefly, then refreeze in your cloak. The world, already grey, becomes whiter still, its edges blurred. Chroniclers often wrote of snow burying castles for weeks, blocking gates, collapsing roofs. You feel the weight of it now, pressing down from the sky, smothering sound. The courtyard falls quieter as snow thickens, footsteps muffled, voices dampened. Only the wind howls, threading through towers and windows, turning every crack into a whistle. You tilt your head back, watching flakes swirl downward. For a moment, the sight is almost beautiful, delicate patterns twirling against stone. But beauty here is brief. Within minutes, the snow becomes another burden, soaking into cloaks, weighing down roofs, deepening the chill. Oddly enough, one traveller described snow in castles as a blanket that warms nothing, only berries. You smile grimly at the thought. It rings true. The blanket covers all, yet leaves every soul colder than before. You step toward the stables, curious if beasts fare better. Horses stamp their hooves, snorting clouds into the air. Their manes are crusted with frost, their water trough solid ice. A boy breaks it with a hammer, splinters flying, then scoops chunks aside. The animals drink reluctantly, lips cracking against the frozen surface. Even they cough, chests heaving, eyes dull. Most historians agree daylight was when labour peaked. Fetching water, hauling firewood, mending tools, tending beasts. You see the rhythm but no joy, only exhaustion. Every face looks strained, every step weighted. This is not industry but survival disguised as work. A peculiar note in one steward's ledger mentions snow tracked into halls, soaking rushes until they rotted faster. You think of the banquet chamber, and imagine the frozen scraps now buried under melting slush, the smell magnified as damp spreads. The castle rots, even as it stands. The snow thickens still, filling the courtyard, cloaking walls, blurring towers. The world shrinks into white. Your torch sputters useless in daylight, so you extinguish it, though the absence of flame feels like surrender. You shove it into a bracket, wipe frost from your lashes, and keep walking. There's still debate among scholars whether such winters truly felt endless or if memory exaggerated them. Yet standing here, in the grey light, you know the truth. Time itself slows under this sky. Hours feel doubled, days stretched thin, each one identical to the last. The monotony is as punishing as the cold. You lean briefly against the gatehouse wall, breath fogging. The stone is icy, pressing against your shoulder until you flinch. You close your eyes, listening. The coughs continue, the wind howls, the snow falls. All sounds blur into one relentless hymn. And as you open your eyes to the endless grey daylight, you understand. Night brings fear, but day brings no reprieve. In this castle, every hour, every season, every sky is only another face of the same enemy, cold without mercy. The grey daylight lingers far too long, stretching into afternoon, then into evening. You wait for the sun to burn brighter, to pierce the sky with gold, to chase away the damp chill clinging to your cloak, but it never does. Instead, the light wanes slowly, fading into the same heavy dusk that swallowed you yesterday. You realize with a sinking in your gut that you have completed a full circle. One day in this medieval castle feels like an eternity, and yet the cold promises to repeat again tomorrow. You walk through the courtyard once more. Snow lies deeper now, heaped against walls, crusting in uneven ridges where boots have trampled. Dogs dig for scraps, their muzzles white with frost. Servants shuffle past with buckets of slush, their faces blank with exhaustion. The same coughs you heard last night echo still, unchanged. Suffering here does not pause for daylight, and certainly not for the cycle of hours. Contemporary chronicles confirm that winter's blurred time itself. Days melted into nights, weeks into months, all defined only by hunger and cold. You feel that blur tightening around you now. The castle has no rhythm of comfort, no reprieve, only endless repetition. One peculiar note from a clerk's journal remarks how ink marks froze on his quill before drying, smudging records. You imagine your own footsteps recorded similarly, blurred, smeared, half vanished by snow before the day is over. In this place, permanence belongs not to people, but to cold. The torch you carry smokes heavily, leaving streaks of soot on your cloak. Your arms ache from holding it high, yet you cannot put it down. Darkness presses on you the moment the flame dips, eager to reclaim its territory. You think back to the dungeon, the chapel, the hall, and realize every space you've visited has taught the same lesson. Nothing is safe. Not food, not warmth, not prayer, not even knowledge preserved in books. The castle is both fortress and prison, its stones allies of the cold rather than its shields. Most historians agree that life in these castles was endurance, not romance. Tonight, you know that truth in your bones. Your lungs ache from smoke and frost, your joints burn from damp stone, your skin crawls with the memory of rats. You are exhausted beyond words, yet sleep feels impossible. The cold has carved itself into your marrow, making even rest a battle. Oddly enough, one noble's letter mentions longing for spring so desperately that he dreamed of flowers nightly. You close your eyes now, searching your own imagination for spring fields, green, air soft, sun gentle. But the vision falters, overtaken by drafts and coughs, by dripping water and frost on windows. Your mind cannot hold warmth when your body knows only chill. You pass once more through the great hall, now empty again. The hearth glows faintly, embers clinging to life. You sit nearby, stretching your hands toward them, feeling the faintest prick of heat. It is pitiful compared to what you crave, but you take it anyway. You stare into the glow, hypnotized, willing it to swell into a blaze. But the embers only crumble, their light fading. You know they will die soon, like all warmth here, leaving only cold behind. There's still disagreement among scholars whether life in these castles was harsher than that in cottages outside. Some argue peasants fared worse. Others suggest stone walls trapped damp that killed more efficiently than open air. Standing here, you cannot compare. All you know is that within these walls, you are beaten by frost from every side. You rise, cloak heavy, shoulders bent. You walk slowly toward the stairwell that leads back to your chamber. Each step echoes, your body trembling, your mind weary. You push open the door to your bed, the same damp sheets waiting, the same straw rustling. You sigh, half laugh, half groan. There is no escape, only rotation from one misery to another. You lie down, teeth clenched against the shock. The blanket presses like frozen stone. You curl tightly, knees to chest, arms folded. The itch of wool is unbearable, but you endure. Your breath fogs against the canopy, freezing into crystals that drift down like mock snow. You close your eyes, but you know, even in sleep, the cold will not release you. And so you come to the final truth. You would not last a day in this medieval castle. Not because of battle, nor famine, nor even cruelty of men, but because of winter itself, seeping into every seam, gnawing every corner, mocking every effort. The cold is the true lord of this fortress, and it never relinquishes its rule. Now, as you settle back from this long journey through stone and frost, let the tension ease from your shoulders. The castle fades in your imagination, its corridors dimming, its drafts quieting. The coughs grow faint, the rats retreat to silence, the frozen beds melt into memory. You are no longer bound by its walls. Breathe in slowly. Imagine warmth seeping into your chest, not stolen by cold but offered freely. Each exhale carries away the heaviness, the ache of damp stone, the sting of icy cloth. The wind dies down, replaced by stillness. The clang of tools, the shuffle of servants, the endless coughing, these dissolve like frost under sunlight. See instead a softer scene, a room lit gently, not by sputtering torches, but by a steady golden glow. Outside, snow may still fall, but here you are safe, wrapped in comfort. Blankets are soft, air is clean, silence is kind. You are no longer a guest in a medieval fortress. You are a traveller returned home, wiser for the journey, but free of its burden. Let your breath deepen, your hands unclench, your jaw loosens. The restless energy of the castle ebbs away. In its place grows calm, as though you've stepped from shadow into Sunday. The world narrows gently to the sound of your own breathing, the rhythm steady, soothing, unbroken. You have walked through hardship, witnessed endurance, and seen how fragile warmth was in that long-gone age, but you do not carry it with you. The lesson remains, the suffering does not. You are warm, safe, and free. So, close your eyes now. Rest. The castle walls crumble to dust, and only calm remains. Sleep, soft and certain, waits at the edge of your breath. Sweet dreams.